Welcome to the Strategic Veteran, where we chart the course from service to civilian triumph. I'm Adam Peters, a veteran, entrepreneur, and your fellow navigator in the quest for a life of impact and fulfillment. My mission is simple: to empower you with the tools and stories that turn challenge into opportunity. Having walked the path from active duty to where I stand now, I understand the search for purpose that comes with hanging up the uniform. It's a path I've walked, with its trials, its tribulations, and its victories, and it's a journey we're on together. This podcast is more than just conversation. It's a beacon for those seeking to redefine our missions through entrepreneurship. It's about igniting the entrepreneurial spirit that lives within us, the spirit that compels us to create, lead, and make our mark on the world. Here we connect with veterans who have built businesses, sparked change, and found their purpose in the marketplace of ideas. They're not just surviving, they're thriving. They've transformed their service into startups, their experiences into enterprises, and they're proof that you can too. So whether you're scribbling business plans on napkins or stepping into the arena of innovation, remember, you're not alone. You're in good company. So let's explore these stories of transformation and take the first steps together on our path to purpose. Let's begin. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of The Strategic Veteran. I'm your host, Adam Peters, and today we're honored to feature Alex Tessier, whose exemplary service in the United States Air Force and groundbreaking entrepreneurial initiatives perfectly illustrate the essence of a strategic veteran. Alex's military journey began in 2005 and has spanned various roles from technical, hands-on work with F-16 and F-22 jets to strategic leadership positions in the Air National Guard. Rising through the ranks to first lieutenant, Alex has not only excelled in her military career, but also transcended traditional roles to make significant contributions to aerospace and veteran services. Post-military, Alex became a pivotal force in the civilian sector, leveraging her expertise as a depot manager at Northrop. Her journey took a remarkable turn towards entrepreneurship with the creation of Billets, an initiative that transforms housing solutions for military families, providing them with stability and support essential for successful transitions. Today, Alex is going to share insights into the challenges she faced during her military and post-military careers, her motivations for starting Billets, and how she continues to influence and inspire the veteran community through her innovations. So let's dive into a detailed discussion with Alex, a true strategic veteran whose dedication to service and innovation continues to redefine the landscape for military families and veteran entrepreneurs alike. Alex, thank you so much for being here. Hopefully I didn't butcher your last name.
No, that was exactly right. And that was quite the introduction. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Got to give credit where credit is due. So we always like to start the show. Just talk to us about, early life, where you grew up, kind of how childhood was, and what inspired you to join the Air Force.
So it's funny. My husband asked me the other day he called me a military brat. I said, I'm not really a military brat. I'm more of a Northrop Grumman brat. Both my parents were in the U.S. Air Force. They worked F-4s. Dad was weapons. Mom was a crew chief. They did about 10 years, and they both applied to go be officers. And the U.S. Air Force kind of did them dirty and said, well, we'll take one of you, but not both, but you have to choose who's going. And they went, well, we're not doing that, and that's going to ruin our relationship. So they got out, and they held a variety of jobs. My dad is very much an entrepreneur. They owned a gym for a little while. My dad was into bodybuilding. They did jewelry shop. I'm trying to remember. They've told me all of them, and I can't remember all of them. But at some point, they both landed at Northrop Grumman. And it seems like in order to move up, you have to be willing to move around. So I was born in Whittier, California. And my brother and sister and I were all born in Whittier, California. And the day after my sister was born, we moved to Missouri. And then 2.5 years later, we moved again. And 2.5 years later, we moved again. So moved my whole life. When I was 17, my parents' divorce was finalized. That hit me a little bit harder than I was ever willing to admit, but looking back, it played a big role in kind of who I was in my decision-making. We had just moved back to Warrensburg, Missouri, my brother, sister, and I, with my mother, so right outside Whiteman Air Force Base. And I had earned a partial scholarship for art and to an all-women's college. And I was like, that is not going to fly. I'm interested in dating.
You weren't interested in
I'm interested in dating. I'm interested in getting out. I hadn't dated to that point almost at all. I'm interested in getting out. I'm bumping heads with my mom a little bit, trying to challenge who I was as an adult. And she had
Being 17, right?
17, yep. And
Yeah,
she,
being 17. That's
right,
typical.
very typical teenager at that point. And she had very much romanticized being in the military. I tell the story. She was telling me one time about putting safety wire through her hand by accident, and she made it sound like the best experience ever, like stitches and all. And and I was like, that's it. I'm gonna go be Billy Badass in the Air Force. And my dad actually tried to talk me out of it. He said, I'm not signing that paperwork. And I said, well, you can sign, true teenage fashion, said, you can sign the paperwork now and be a part of my life, or I'll wait 6 months and do it without you and probably not be talking to you. So I was a jerk. And my dad signed the paperwork and let me go in. And I went in as a crew chief shortly thereafter. But
Nice. So you're, I mean, the Air Force is very much just in your blood with both your parents doing a decade in the Air Force doing them dirty. They're like, well, fuck you. We're moving on. And then, I mean, Northrop's really not any different than the military. It's just, right. It's defense contracting. You're doing pretty much the same thing, I would guess.
yeah, so and in reality, like my grandpa served for 20 years. We just laid him to rest a couple years ago, and he had the full veteran everything, and it was really cool to see. And they were great. The honor guard out of Peterson came out, and they were great to my grandmother. So I don't want not everything about the Air Force's decision making is terrible. Not all of it's great, but yeah, my grandpa did a full 20 years, and it allowed him to support a family of 8 children. So, you know,
So was the Air Force like the only option for you? You just knew immediately Air Force because it's just ingrained in you, or had you considered any other
I think
branch?
I think we're going to talk about this a little bit, but it went along the lines of a lot of my decision making. If I didn't know a whole lot about it, I wasn't a big risk taker. I wasn't going to go try it. So I knew enough about the Air Force for it to not be near as scary. And actually, it was another reason that I chose military service. Was my mom had described, what a first sergeant does and how you have insurance and they're going to put you up in a dorm. I was like, oh, I don't have to adult fully yet. Like they're going to put me in a dorm and feed me and I don't have to figure out how to pay a bill. Okay. Because I knew I had to pay bills, but the concept of signing up for to get the water on, I was like, how do I do that? So,
That's, I mean, yeah, right. I remember, it's funny hearing you say that because it's not something I think about often, but you're right. I didn't have to be a full adult the whole time I was in the Army. I didn't know how insurance truly worked until I worked in the industry after I got out. And then I really discovered, oh, well, this is a giant fucking scam.
yes.
But that's the kind of shit you don't realize, and I very much took for granted. Like you just, if you're sick, you go to sick call, and it's taken care of, right? Like that's not how it works when you get out. Like you got to make an appointment, and then you got to wait, and it's not. It's like holy shit! Like I have to be an adult. So I'm glad you brought that up because I think I know it hasn't been talked about on this show yet, but like it's just another one of those things when you get to transition that you're not thinking about because the military very much you don't have to adult all the way, right? Like you have to adult, but you're not adulting all the way.
It's an entirely different type of expectation. There's some sort of expectation that you show up to work on time and you know how to do your job and you are an adult, and yet you're not allowed to go to the bathroom without letting somebody know where you go, right? So it's a very weird expectation that they set. But again, I don't have to have a bill. I just have to show up on time. And so if you'd asked me at 18, 19 if that's why I was going in, I would not have admitted that I was afraid to adult. 18 years later and doing a lot of self-reflection, again, I had to work on some things and I had to go back and go, okay, it really was about being afraid to make a decision. So but yeah, the Air Force, I was much more comfortable with it. My dad had talked about being weapons and being the one man on the crew, which I should know that now. I am a weapons maintenance officer in the Guard. So sorry, my weapons guys. I have not been as involved during our transition as I would have liked to have been. So when I get back out there, I fully intend to go to load bar in every drill and pay more attention.
Yeah. So you 17 joined the Air Force. You had a little spat with your dad. Obviously he signed the paperwork because you're still talking to your dad, I assume.
Actually, there was a brief period where we weren't talking, but it was not because he didn't sign the paperwork. It was because I decided to go and get pregnant at 19. in the Air Force, and he was not thrilled.
We could get to that. I also had with my parents periods of a year each where I didn't talk to them, and it involved them trying to be involved in my money and how I spend my money as an adult. And I just told them, like, either you can butt the fuck out or I'm not going to talk to you. And after about a year, they both kind of got the message that I'm very much my own person and going to do what I want, and you don't get to control me anymore.
My dad very much was like, hey, I think you're making some poor decisions, and I wasn't ready to hear it. And so I just kind of stopped talking to him for a little bit. If he hears this and if you ask him, I'm not sure he remembers that we stopped talking for a little bit, but he was calling my mom and going, hey, is she okay? Because I was still talking to her. But he got remarried and to a wonderful, wonderful lady, and they have a child together, and that kind of saved our relationship. And to this day, he's still one of my biggest fans. He's involved in all of my businesses. I call him all the time for feedback. So definitely.
Well, and I mean, that makes a ton of sense because you did say earlier, your dad is very entrepreneurial, right? So by birthright, almost, I feel like you got a leg up there, right? I didn't figure out I wanted to be in business for myself until my mid 30s. I didn't have anybody to look up to that was building a business or had a business or had multiple businesses. So I think that's really cool that your dad is involved in all of your stuff to this day, and that's really cool. Why F-16s and F-22s? You just wanted to kind of follow in your parents' footsteps and turn wrenches on airplanes? Why not try to fly them? Like, what made your decision to actually pick up the skill that you did when you went to the Air Force?
So I didn't want to go to college at the time. I didn't know what I wanted to study. So you had to be, a college graduate or going down that path to commission to be a pilot. It just was not something I was super interested in. Fixing airplanes, I was on this path that I'm a tomboy and I'm going to do tomboy things, and it just fell right in line with that. I like a challenge. I like building things. We're out on our farm right now. Part of the reason I'm in what I'm in is we were working on the garden beds this morning, and I'm building a raised garden bed with my son and a trellis and whatever else, and my husband's building a cabin. And so I like doing things with my hands. I thought building or fixing airplanes would be right in line with what I wanted to do. F-16s and F-22s in particular, I had a chief try to talk me out of fighters and told me to go heavies. And my mom did F-4s.
And by heavies, are you talking about C-5, C-130, C-17?
Anything heavier than a fighter. So bombers, refuelers, anything that was not the high ops tempo, that was fighters. He's like, and he was bombers, right? I knew him from Whiteman Air Force Base. He worked B-2s. He's like, I promise you're going to like it still, but the pace is slower. Like, trust me. I was like, no, I'm going to go do what my mom did. Cause she's like, there's nothing like hearing your jet take off and watching it come land.
I always think it's really cool when I see the Thunderbirds or the Blue Angels and the little routines they have with their crew chiefs and the pilot, and they like do their little, that's awesome.
I still get chills watching my airplanes take off. So, and yeah, I love it. I still love it.
So yeah, F-16s, F-22s, I am a licensed pilot. I got my pilot's license and went to flight school after I got out. So I've always been drawn to airplanes. My favorite ever is the B-17. There's actually one hanging on my wall right here. And then a close second is what your parents worked on with the F-4 and the F-14s. I think those are sweet airplanes.
They're really cool.
And they kind of like paved the way for like the 5th gen fighters that we have now, because they were just so good at what they did back, when they were commissioned to do what they did. So let's talk about, you get to your unit and you're in the Air Force now, and your mom had glamorized this, right? And she glorified it, and it was awesome. Was that your experience?
So I was a little bit let down. And again, we talked about this a little bit beforehand. If you could imagine a mix between the Rapunzel of Tangled when, and I don't know how many of your viewers are going to recognize Disney, but if you go look up the scene where Rapunzel's going to the Snuggly Duckling and she's like, oh, I love ducklings. Like that level of naivete as they walk in. And if you don't know, they walk into the Snuggly Duckling restaurant and it's just she describes them as thugs and ruffians and thieves they're like, why is there a princess in here, right? So that naivete with kind of the terrible attitude of the young lady in 10 Things I Hate About You, joining. And I really thought that I needed to go be one of the guys. And what I wanted was to go be one of the guys. What I really wanted was to serve something bigger than myself. And I wasn't prepared to admit that. I wanted respect. I wanted to do something that I could respect about myself. And there were plenty of guys that were willing to be like, oh yeah, you want to be one of the guys? Sure, we'll let you do that, in a very not supportive way.
Malicious way,
Yeah.
probably a malicious
Yeah.
way.
And
Like we don't want her here. We're going to show her kind of we'll run her off kind of thing. I'm not for that. So anybody listening, and to you, I don't believe in that. I think that's bullshit. I think everybody should get a fair shot to try to do what they want to do.
well, and I did, to be fair, I had a handful of people that were wonderful that made sure that I got a chance to go out there and work my butt off, and I did. And I was telling my husband about an example last night that kind of sums up the experience, where I'm in my second week at my first base and I'm pushing a toolbox out. One of the guys is like, hey, you want me to push your toolbox for you? And I kind of looked at him funny. I was like, would you offer that to one of the guys? He's like, no, I'm offering it to you. And I was like, well, I appreciate the offer, but I want to carry my own weight. I'm going to push my toolbox. And if I need help, I'll ask, but thank you. And he said, cool, got it. So we get out to the jet, we change a tire, and it's a 2-man lift to put the tire on top of the box. I said, hey, can you help me lift this? He's like, no, you're one of the guys, right? You got this. Go ahead. I will be claiming disability for the back injury that resulted. But I was not going to tell him. I lifted it up. I got it on there, pushed it back. My lower back hurt for the next week and a half. I still have pain in that area, but I got it up there.
I can imagine. There's no reason it needs to be like that either. I mean, I my first duty station was at a mechanized unit, and I remember changing track on Bradley's, and everybody had to help. Like there was no, you can't like, oh, you're weak, private, you can't lift this section of track. No, motherfucker, that's a whole day's worth of work to change track on a Bradley. Like, and the dismounts and the crew and the mechanics, they're all working together. You're always asking for help. So for them to have treated you like that, obviously, that happens a lot more than we care to think about in the military. And I think it's bullshit. Absolutely bullshit.
It does. And I think part of it is the mindset. I think, and again, we did talk about this a little bit before we got on here. But if you don't go in knowing what your own expectations are, and the same thing goes for going out, right? On your way out. If you don't go in knowing what it is you want and why you're doing what you're doing, then you're kind of, first of all, you're not clear to other people what your expectations are. But then you are kind of leaving it up to other people to set the expectation for you. And I got into that was my experience a lot of the way. Because again, I go back to, the reason I joined the Air Force in particular was I knew I didn't want to go to college at the moment. I didn't know what I wanted to study. I didn't want to go be with an all-girl group. That was not going to happen and be good. And I didn't want to do 2 years in a tiny town in Missouri, but I didn't know what I did want. And so I kind of went, well, my mom really liked the Air Force. She made it sound great. I'm going to go try that. And I justified it with all sorts of reasons. They're going to pay for my college when I finally do decide. I don't have to fully adult yet. There are plenty of people that are currently doing it, and there's a very strict process that I'm going to follow. I love processes. It's going to get me where I'm going. There's a path laid out for me if I choose to follow it. What I wasn't prepared for were the day-to-day personal interactions that were vastly different as an adult female in a male-dominant career field versus just being in high school, versus having very strict limitations between an adult and a child. It was eye-opening in not a particularly good way right off the bat.
Right. And so you are currently a lieutenant in the in the Guard, correct? And you're still actively doing that in the Guard. And so, but you originally came into active duty for 7 years, and you made the rank of staff sergeant, right? Which is that E6
Oh
in the Air
gosh,
Force still?
it's only E4, E5. It's E5.
Okay, got
Sorry,
it. So a tech sergeant is actually an
that
E6.
sounds right. Yep. I would have like
I
airman
don't know my Air
basic,
Force
airman
ranks.
A1C, senior airman, staff sergeant. Okay, E5.
So let's talk about that evolution, because I'm not super familiar. I had a buddy from high school that also went to the Air Force, and he worked on the stealth, which I thought was always really cool. But he hated it because he was stuck in alien world out there in Nevada. But I never learned the Air Force ranks and like kind of what the process is to kind of get your next rank. I know it's very different from the way the Army does it. So walk us through kind of all those events that shape your career and how you end up becoming a first
Well,
lieutenant.
so again, I wanted as much guidance as possible. So when given and I wanted the bonus. So given the opportunity to go 4 year or 6 year, I did 6 year. Because I joined for 6 years, when I left basic, I was automatically an A1C. So E3. Um, from E3, we are basically automatically handed senior airman or E4. You can earn it a little bit early if you do certain things. I actually remember asking, hey, can I earn this? But I was pregnant with my first child at the time, and I had terrible, terrible morning sickness. And being a crew chief, I can't work on the airplanes. And so the staff sergeant, who was my supervisor at the time, went, there's no way for us to compare you to your peers. You're not getting senior airman below the zone, period, ever. And he said it was because I was pregnant. I have tons of great stories, and I'm happy to share the great stories, but I have a lot of not so great stories, and I do choose to share them here just because I think we kind of gloss over them as if they don't really happen. And so you go and you meet with senior leadership that is a male that's had a great career and had the camaraderie and not had the negativity in a way that a woman will have it, and or just a different type of person, right, will have it, and um, they'll think that it doesn't happen, and so they won't know how to deal with it. So my experience with my fourth child was not vastly different than my experience with my first child, which was kind of disappointing. So my first one, they said, you're not gonna make senior airman below the zone. I had not earned senior airman below the zone, but it wasn't because I was pregnant. I just was not, I was not performing to the level that I could have been. And there are a lot of reasons that I could list. And a lot of them to do with my experience thus far, right? It was the toolbox. It was the expediter who asked for nudes and I said no, and so he wouldn't let me on the truck. It was my very first night at my very first base being sexually assaulted, because my sponsor, another female, decided that she wasn't going to show up, and I didn't know how to get to the hotel, and so started talking to this guy, and it wasn't because of that. I shouldn't say it was because of that. That contributed to it, right? And so this guy, I ended up talking to him. He was an Army guy, probably in his mid 30s, easily six something and 200 some odd pounds. And I'm thinking, again, brother in arms, he's going to help me find the hotel and it's going to be all good. And that was not the result. It was not all good. Um,
And this is how your Air Force career started from day one at getting to your very first unit after basic training and whatever you guys call
yeah.
AIT.
So I went to basic from October to November, arrived at Shepherd Air Force Base. I think it was mid-November. Went to hot training where I went from just kind of inspecting old aircraft and getting familiar with the F-16 for several, it was about, I think it's 4 months at the time. And then in May-ish of 2006, I think, I went to Luke Air Force Base for hot training where I actually practiced working on a live active aircraft. And then April, I PCS overseas to Korea for my first base. And I hadn't heard a whole lot from my sponsor. I didn't know what to do or where to go. I actually first started talking to this guy on the bus ride from Seoul, Korea down to Osan. And so when my sponsor didn't show up and it's like 3 o'clock in the morning and I don't know what to do or where to go or whatever, and he's kind of like, hey, I'll help you. I was like, yeah, great. Let's like get me back to the hotel room. And he helped me get all the way checked in. And it took me a long time to admit that I had been like, even to myself, like I was able to stop it because I was willing to look at the guy and go, I'm not the person to do this to. Like as it was happening, I remember freezing and evaluating and going, is he going to kill me? Probably not. We're on an Air Force base. He's an Army career guy. He's probably not looking to end his career by killing me. Okay. Is he going to physically harm me? We are in a hotel with 300 people on base. If he makes too much noise, it's probably not good for his career. So am I just going to lay here and let this happen? And I was like, no, I'm not. So I don't remember looking at him. I don't remember how I said it. I just remember stopping and being like, I am not the person to do this to. If you continue, I will report you and I will ensure that your career is over. But if you stop now, I will not report it. And he was kind of shocked, kind of like, well, why'd you invite me up here? I didn't invite you up here, not like that, ever. I went straight to the door, opened it up, stood in front of the door with my foot in front of the door to make sure like the door couldn't be shut again, and fully prepared to scream. He got his stuff and walked out. And I didn't tell anybody for a couple weeks. And
I can't imagine sitting with that for a couple of weeks. In fact, I can't even imagine that happening. I don't understand that or the motivation behind it or anyway. But when you do decide to report it, what happens?
I didn't report it still. I still wasn't fully prepared to admit that it was a sexual assault. It took me a long time to use those words about what happened. Another member that I went to tech school with arrived in Korea a couple days after I did, and my flight chief told me. And I basically went and knocked on his door and I said, hey, we're going to go on a walk. And he's like, I'm sorry, we didn't really get along at tech school. Why are you talking to me now? And I said, well, I don't want to be alone and I'm not going to go downtown alone. And I know you and you know me. And although we didn't particularly get along, you've never been terrible to me. And you.
So he was safe for you at that moment,
right.
Maybe?
Yeah, yes. And that was, I didn't know how to explain it to him. He had a chew in, he was in his boxers. He was like, why are you knocking on my door? And because we didn't get
genuinely surprised, right? Like, oh, we don't get along. Why are you here? This is awkward.
So like he slams the hotel room door, gets dressed. We're still in the hotel. And I was like, let's go downtown. And we walked for hours, like a couple days in a row. And he finally was like, what is wrong with you? Why are we walking? And I finally told him what happened. And unfortunately, I'm not sure what I thought his reaction was going to be. But maybe I downplayed it because I was still downplaying it in my mind. But his reaction to that was, oh, we should be intimate. We should date. You're telling me something intimate. We should be intimate. And it wasn't until that point that I had the very typical reaction where I went and had the hottest shower I could fathom and scrubbed and scrubbed and scrubbed. And he was like, are you okay? I was like, no, not at all. But I didn't know how to tell him what was bothering me. And because we had spent so much time together at this point, and now I also, this wasn't the only experience. This was just like the cumulative point up, where like this is the worst that's happened so far. And I'm actually very fortunate that it wasn't significantly worse with the decision making that I had going on at the time. I'm actually very fortunate that it wasn't worse. But that was kind of my breaking point where I didn't trust myself anymore. I did not trust my ability to make a good decision. And I decided that I was just, and it's not a forward thought where you're like, I'm just going to stop making decisions. I'm going to shut down and I'm not going to make any decisions anymore. So
you're just running away.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah, basically.
I wasn't sexually assaulted. This guy didn't just make it worse again by doing that. So when he said we should date, I was like, sure, let's date. Right. And there were a couple of times where I attempted to reclaim control. And I would ask for help. So I remember I tried breaking up with him, and he would go to work and talk about what a man, I hate what a slut I was, what a hoe I was, and how I dated all these people, which was not true. But
This motherfucker is, first of all, taking advantage of you in a very vulnerable state with something way off base that made you immediately have to go take the hottest shower you could because it disgusted you, right? It made you feel gross.
oh yeah, I couldn't look in the mirror. I didn't.
And now he has the stones to go behind your back and talk shit like that. Like, what? I don't understand. That doesn't make sense. And as bad as I was as an infantry guy with, dark humor and just, no empathy for anything really, like that, obviously to me, that is way off base and not something I would ever even consider doing.
When I talked to my family about it, they had a hard time believing it. And this is what, like, you talk about a hero's journey or their arc where they go through certain things in their life. I had to figure out that I was being gaslit, essentially, right? And God, all these terms are such hot terms right now that everybody's using, but it finally gave a term for me to be like, oh, that does describe very well kind of what was going on, because out in public, everybody loved this guy. He knew how to play the guitar. He was very charismatic, great sense of humor, not a bad looking guy. Just made friends with everybody, but who he was behind closed doors was just different. And I don't know if that's who he is today. I did marry him. That's a long story how it ended up there. Basically, I went to a supervisor and was like, hey, I don't know what to do. This guy's essentially stalking me. Every time I break up with him, he's like sitting outside my door crying. We're in the dorms. It's Osan Air Base. I can't move off base. I had to look up the definition of stalker the other day. I was like, oh yeah, that really literally is what he was doing. Because my coping mechanism is I'm just not going to look at it, which is not healthy either. Right. So.
No, absolutely not. It's probably the worst
right,
thing you can do.
Exactly. So, finally really going back and looking at it going, no, he really did fit the definition of a stalker. And somebody should have looked at the fact that I was 18 and very naive and been like, this is personal, but let me help you a little bit. So I was very let down when I went to my supervisor, and he's like, I don't know what to do. Go to the flight chief. I went to the flight chief, and he's like, I don't have time for your high school bullshit. He's like, go talk to the first sergeant. And I went to the first sergeant, and the first sergeant was like, I'm PCSing in a month. I am not getting bogged down with this shit. You figure out how to deal with it. And so I dated him because everybody was nicer when I dated him. He wasn't crying outside my dorm room. I didn't have people talking about what a hoe I was at work, or I would jump intakes and find Tess gives BJs for cutbacks written on the inside of and that was extremely common. Like my name wasn't the first one I saw on there. It was my sponsor's name and the other young lady that got there right before me. They're just as young as I am. They're 18, 19, fresh out of tech school at Osan Air Base for their first year.
I wish that I could speak more on this, but as we all know, the infantry didn't allow women in until after I was out. So I wasn't around females at all when I was in the Army, like really ever. Right. Like it just wasn't the way that it was. So I'm flabbergasted at hearing some of this stuff. And I'm, honestly, and dudes are dudes, right? They're just gross pigs for the most part. And they do shit like that. I know that because I've been into any bathroom stall in any bar and there's some woman's name written on there, call this phone number for a good blowjob or whatever. Right. Like, so I do know that happens, but I think it's probably, to me, it's shocking. I don't know why it should be, but I think it's going to come off to the audience too as shocking for those that aren't familiar with what a lot. And this is very common across all branches of the military for a lot of women.
I think it is. I've only recently, I've only recently started joining some more. I don't like when we make exclusive spaces for people, right? But only started recently recognizing that maybe there is some benefit to it, because if I go to talk about this in a all male veteran or the airman NCO, senior NCO page, I'm just going to get roasted, and that's not going to help anything. It's not going to make anybody else come forward. I can handle, I think, most of the crap, the flack that's going to come back from this. But and I know there will be people that will say that I just got on here for a pity party, or that I'm a victim, or I shouldn't have done these things, and they'll victim blame and whatever else. And then there'll be a million people that'll come to my defense. And I don't, man, and I don't want pity. I want people to know that not all of our experiences are the same. And some of us really did join to do something bigger with our lives. And that's what helped guide me to entrepreneurship at some point, right? So I had to go back and face the sexual assault. I had to go back and face that I married my stalker at some point. I had to go back and face that eventually I left him, but I was still carrying that baggage around. I had to face that what my parents taught me about marriage maybe wasn't going to work out, right? I tried desperately to make that marriage work. We had 3 kids together. He was not.
In some way, shape, or form, you're stuck with him, or a piece of him forever.
He has
right?
my 3 older kids right now. They wanted to move back in with him because I had failed to work on myself enough to be that good parent that I wanted to be. You described at one point a little bit about your childhood, and I was like, oh, I think you just described me as a mom early on. I don't think it's always wrong. I just don't think it's always right. And I wasn't in a place to be a better parent, unfortunately, at the time. But I finally left the military, active duty. So I had to test and earn points to make staff sergeant, because you'd asked that question. I didn't make it the first time around. I did make it the second time around. I was at a new base.
So you left Korea with your married to your stalker.
Yeah.
And so you from Korea.
I actually
where
went to Aviano Air Base, and I had hoped that the Italy is incredible, by the way, for anybody that.
So, okay, I do have some questions about Italy, because it's one of the Germany and Italy were the 2 places I wanted to go most in my Army career. And I had a lot of advice from the guys that had come from Italy in the Army. They're like, Italy's government is so fucked up. I spent 3 years there, and my free time, I was locked on posts because they lock posts because they're always protesting. Is that
so? There were a lot
true?
of protests. There was a specific gate we weren't allowed to use. I called Italy the ghetto of Europe, because there was a point where I switched housing from the basically economy housing to the military housing, and which is not on a military base there. It's a government contractor to build to military or U.S. specs out in the middle. This one was in Maniago, Italy. And every day on the way to work, I would drive past this dilapidated cement house that was full of tires. I was like, is this real? Like, the bridge is falling apart. I was like, I'm going to end up in the river one of these days.
You're not the first person to tell me that about Italy. My wife did a semester abroad in Italy, and she tells me the same thing. She's like, Italy's kind of gross. Like, people dump their urine in the street. Like, it's not like, it's cool because it's foreign to us, right? And like the culture difference and just the different language and all that. But she's like, it's kind of gross. Like, it really isn't.
And there were things about it that were like, like I said, we're starting a farm out here, and one of the things that we want to do is kind of replicate the Italian Christmas market, because it was incredible. Straight out of a fairy tale, just one of the coolest things you've seen. You can walk down the aisles and you can smell the hot cider and the mulled wine and the cinnamon, and you've got the beer vendor that's around the corner, and the handmade crafted ornaments and the cheeses and there were things about it that were incredible. And I highly encourage that people, if they have the chance and it's safe, I never know in today's world, to go check it out. But yeah, I was there for just under a year because I did get pregnant with my first child while I was there.
Okay. And then you PCS to Italy, right? And are you thinking kind of, okay, new unit, change of scenery, maybe things will start to get better for me. Maybe my experiences will change. probably not recognizing kind of the detriment being married to this man that, you know, is to your mental health anyway,
Yes.
right? And to the work that your future self is going to have to do. You're not recognizing that, but maybe I would assume looking at the PCS is like, okay, maybe now we can start over and kind of leave this chapter behind and things will get better
Oh,
over here.
absolutely. And in all honesty, I really thought that maybe I could leave him because we were going to be stationed separately. I thought I could leave him. But what he had said to me for the 6 months leading up to my PCS was what a terrible mom I was going to be. And I believed him. I had no experience with children. The one child I babysat choked on a Cheerio and it scared the crap out of me. He was fine. He was fine, but it scared me. I was like, I'm going to kill my own kid choking on Cheerios. I'm not a nurturing person. Like, again, a tomboy, right? I do tomboy things. I don't want to cuddle. I don't want to hold hands. I don't want flowers. I want
a hammer and nails and some wood.
right.
Let me
So when
have
he's like,
it.
"You're gonna be a
Right.
terrible
Give me the
mom," I
wrench and
believed him, and
some,
he said it
yeah.
every day, all day. And I remember him looking at my body at one point and telling me, he's like, "Man, it's a good thing I did that to you because nobody else is gonna want you now." And
Jesus Christ. So the dude, so not only are you already just in an awful place, and I don't mean that like in any way at all, but just from what I'm hearing you say, you're just in this awful place, and now he's just adding fuel to the fire by continuing to
well,
manipulate you.
right, and unfortunately, I look back at things that I eventually learned about who he was growing up, and it's a learned behavior. So there's a part of me that wants to give him grace for who he was at 18, 19, the same way that I would like grace for who I was and the decisions I was making at 18, 19. Um, the reason I don't is because at some point he's no longer a child, right? And the same way that I had to go back and look at my decision making and who I was and who I wanted to become, I expected him to do the same, and he wasn't willing to and still isn't. So,
Yeah, and in order to give grace to someone else, you really have to see that they have demonstrated that they've taken responsibility for their role in whatever it is you're going to give them grace for, or else, like, what does it
right,
mean, right?
exactly. And so, um, yeah, my experience didn't change significantly at the next unit. My sponsor was a gentleman that was actually getting ready to retire, and I remember him reaching over and touching my leg while I'm A1C pregnant, 6 months,
What
and
the fuck?
and
Like,
and
Jesus
he's just super
Christ.
touchy. And I was like, is this a cultural, like, I'm like, I'm not comprehending. Why is this happening? Like, this is supposed to be a supervisor. I'm only 19 still. He's 40 something. And I went to my flight chief and I was like, hey, I'm really not comfortable with him being my sponsor anymore. He was touching my leg while we were driving up to this thing that he wanted to show us. Like, there were other people in the car, they saw it, but I don't know how to handle this. And the flight chief was like, just, are you saying he harassed you? And I was like, well, no, I wouldn't take it that far. I just don't know what to do. And he's like, well, don't say anything. He's getting ready to retire and he'll be out of here.
Well, that's not the right fucking answer either, right? Like we know that. You probably knew that at the
Yeah, I was
time,
really
but
frustrated because
again,
I'm like, I'm not trying to get somebody in trouble. This guy served honorably as far as I know and deserves everything that comes with serving honorably. I just really, I think what I was looking for is I don't know how to set boundaries or hold them politely. Can somebody help give me the words to tell this person? And again, that was an expectation outside of no supervisor in the military wants to be your surrogate parent and teach you how to set boundaries. But I did not effectively do that looking back, right?
right. And just to squash that, like, yeah, no supervisor in the Army wants to have to play parent to a young Joe or a young airman. But at the same time, that's your role as a leader. It's your responsibility to lead, train, and mentor young airmen and soldiers, right? And so how can someone come to you and you as a leader just like, well, don't say anything? No, you know what the right answer is, especially when 19-year-old you is standing in front of him saying, I don't know what to do. I don't feel like it was harassment, yet there were other people in the car, and this man who I don't know decided he needed to put his hand on my leg. Like, I just don't know where that became okay. Like, for me, I'll just give you an example because I told you I didn't work closely with females, and on deployments, I would see how fast men from the units that I was a part of getting involved with females and how fast that can ruin
Mm-hmm.
your career. Just, and it's not a knock on females. It's just the dynamics of a deployment, and usually they're sleeping around with whatever, however, and it just ruins careers. And so for me, it was always like, I will always be respectful, especially particularly when they outrank me, but I'm just going to give them a wide berth because I don't know how to handle this. But if they do come to me with this problem, I still know that it's my responsibility to go and report it, because for 12 and a half years, every fucking month, we're doing a sharp training, right? I'm sure it's no different in the Air Force. I mean, and that all started about the time I came in, from literally from the time I got home and reintegrated from my first deployment. Every single month, even on deployments, there was mandatory 3 hours of sharp training.
Yeah, so we did SARC training. It was funny. It was very interesting sitting in it, because I think by the time that I admitted to myself that I had been assaulted, it was sitting in an Air National Guard training in Oklahoma. So it's probably 2014, and I'm listening to these guys talk about, it was the first time that they had attempted to do a small groups training. So instead of just sitting up there and watching the PowerPoint, they wanted our leadership to get more engaged, and we're going to go have these conversations. And I remember one of the older gentlemen being like, well, the girls just shouldn't go drink with the guys. And he's not wrong. We should be able to, but we shouldn't do it. Like, it's in we live in reality. We shouldn't do it. And I look back at my career, and there's a point where I'd go drink with the guys, and in tech school and in Korea. Well, I didn't drink. I was too young, but like, and I mean that, like, I did not underage drink. So for anybody out there who's like, oh, she's bullshit. And I was such a rule follower for the most part. Like,
not me. I did a lot. I did more drinking before I turned 21 than I did after I turned 21.
My dad gave me my first drink with I think his girlfriend at the time. And I felt like so bad. I was like, I'm good. I don't want to do it anymore. I sure as heck wasn't going to do it with a bunch of guys who, again, my tech school experience wasn't significantly different than my active duty experience. There were just a couple more layers of prevention in between, because you have MTIs, right, who are supposed to be your dad, right? And they were as bad as everybody else. So
you're going through all of this, married to this man who is manipulating the fuck out of you and transitioning out of the Air Force. So you are, I don't know, the transition to me in any kind of normal, I guess what I would consider normal, military career, like what I had, right? Like, it was my whole identity. I was 17 to 30, right? Like, it's everything I knew. It shaped very much of who I thought I was and what I thought I was good at, and all of that. And not taking anything away from your career or your service, but obviously, like, your experience is much, much different than mine. So how did all of this really, like, I'm sure it didn't play well into your transition at all, right? So did it amplify, or did it just make your transition different? And that's kind of what sparked, maybe the change and doing the work on yourself? Is that kind of where you started to wake up a little bit, maybe, and like start to take back some of that power for yourself?
Again, yeah, no. So I think you could easily categorize my transition the same way anybody getting out would, right? I had these things that were my mission, and there's no longer that mission. And so although I didn't feel like I was a part of the unit, and I'm sure, like, there are people that I worked with that if they recognized me, they'd be like, yeah, you weren't a part of the unit. You were whatever, right? My home life had degraded to the point where I was miserable at home. I was definitely one of those crazy people at home. And it was showing up in my workplace in that I refused to interact with anybody. There were times when, like, I just so desperately needed to interact with somebody that I would overshare, sitting in the truck with somebody who was actually nice to me. But the majority of the time, I remember this guy coming up to me and being like, hey, we're having a barbecue this weekend. You coming out? I was like, why the fuck are you talking to me? He was like, because you're obviously not in a good place and you need a friend. And I was like, fuck off. He goes,
right, because of what you've been through to this point, it's hard for you to trust somebody who probably, it sounds like to me, had genuine intentions at heart. Like, hey, I noticed you're in a bad place. Please come to this barbecue and just have a good day.
Genuinely,
right?
He kept in touch with me. We still talk today. He's still a great friend of mine.
Awesome.
And he made sure that, like, as I finally decided that I probably need to really leave this relationship, it's not serving me or my children. And that was my wake up call. I'd left active duty, lost the mission, right? Never felt like I was included, but lost the mission. Never had a lot of friends in the first place, because I shut everybody out. Because
Mainly because you didn't feel like you were part
right,
of the
I
unit
felt like
or the
every time I was
community, right?
kind to somebody, my husband would accuse me, my ex-husband would accuse me of flirting, and the guys would act like I was flirting with them. It felt like, and obviously it's not every time, right? Like, I'm being hyperbolic a little bit, but it got to a point where it felt like if I'm nice to anybody, they're just going to assume that means I want to sleep with them, and I'm not. I'll just be mean to everybody, and I took it to an extreme. I'm sure I was very difficult to work with, but so
Well, it says a lot about you that you can sit here and tell your story and then also take ownership for the way that you were to maybe some others. I mean, that's extreme growth. And it's awesome to hear you acknowledge that and embrace that, because it is part of your
yeah,
journey, right?
and so and the reason I say it is because I don't want anybody to ever think that you don't play a part. The people that took advantage of where I was in my life and my being behind the learning curve, they're responsible for their actions, but I was responsible for learning how to do better, right? And I was working so much, I was constantly kind of in a survival mode where I couldn't really take the time to evaluate. I had 3 kids. They were 4, 3, and another one on the way as I was getting out. And I realized the reason that I got out is I realized I couldn't do active duty anymore. I didn't like anybody that I worked with. The mission wasn't enough to keep me in anymore. My home life was not going to improve so long as I was in. And I couldn't even tell you my kids' birthdays. Like, I couldn't remember. I was working so much. And
Jesus.
So when I got pregnant with my third child, I went to my command. I was like, I cannot, motherhood and U.S. Air Force just aren't going to work anymore. And they said, all right, we'll see you later. Bye. And at first they told me I was going to have health insurance and they're going to do a whole transition assistance program and all that. I didn't qualify for health insurance. I didn't qualify for anything because of the way that I got out. And so I was just out.
And your husband at the time, so your ex-husband now, but your husband at the time, he also chose to
He had gotten out.
Correct?
He had gotten out right after our first. He claimed.
Okay. So he had already been out for a while.
He was supposed to go get a job. Our agreement was I was going to use my GI Bill. That way we'd have some income. I could go back to school, which is something I really wanted to pursue. I'd gone to college off and on the whole time I was in, working towards a degree with Embry-Riddle. So I got out with several credits already earned. He was supposed to maintain a full-time job that he had recently gotten at Holloman Air Force Base. I was going to go ahead, stay with my mom for a little bit, find us a house because Oklahoma City was growing and had a whole bunch of aerospace type jobs. And it was going to be all good. We were going to pick ourselves up from there. I was going to go to college at UCO. So I get out. I think I did 2 weeks with my dad and his wife, and they helped me with the kids. And then they moved me down to my mother's house in Oklahoma City. And I think we were there for maybe another, 2 to 4 weeks. And I'm at the park with my 4-year-old, my 3-year-old, and my 1-month-old. And I get a call and he says, hey, where are you at? I said, I'm at the park with the kids. And I immediately got this really sick feeling because whenever he does this, like, type of phone call and type of voice, he's about to surprise me with something that he thinks is great and I am not going to be happy about. And he's like, oh, I'm in town. I said, what the fuck do you mean you're in town?
You didn't like
and
that
he was
surprise,
like,
huh?
I quit my job. I couldn't be away from my family anymore.
Time out, bro. You're supposed to be like, holding us
literally,
together here.
We have no income, no insurance, and we're staying with my mom. And it was supposed to be short term. So I'm thinking that we're going to go, he's going to keep his job. We'll qualify for a rental property. It doesn't have to be anything special, but it's got to be ours. Can't rely on my parents. We ended up staying with my mom for 6 months while I went back into the reserves. I called a unit that I had made contact with prior to leaving active duty. and said, hey, turns out I actually do need to stay in. Would you guys be willing to have me? And I went and worked with them for a year. I was on orders with them, OJT, for about 6 months. And it was my last duty day. They were like, hey, you're getting ready to start college, right? And I said, yeah, I had signed up to start in the fall. And I came home and he was so high he couldn't walk straight. He couldn't tell me his name. I don't know what he was on. It was some synthetic something or other. But what set me off was my two older kids immediately came up to me and they were like, Mom, we're hungry. We want to eat. And I said, well, you guys should have just had lunch. It's only like 2 p.m. Usually you guys do lunch and snack now. And they said, we had Pop-Tarts. And I said, what do you mean you had Pop-Tarts? I gave you Pop-Tarts at like 4 or 5 a.m. before I went to work. And I was like, is that?
So he's been with them all day, decided he wanted to shoot up or whatever, and neglected the kids. And so now they haven't eaten in 9 hours or
And
so.
and then I look over at my baby, my youngest is 6 months old. She's strapped in the car seat in the same diaper that I left her in. I was like, I'm done. I'm
No.
out. What you were doing to me was one thing. I can pretend it's not happening. What you just did to my kids, I can't do anymore. And so the survival mode didn't go away, right? He and I started going through the divorce. He's still very manipulative, very abusive. He was verbally and emotionally abusive the whole time. It only escalated to physical a couple of times, but he realized that when he put his hands on me, I would wake up and try to separate, right? I was like, physical, I don't do.
Right.
I would fight back.
You're definitely a fighter.
But
And I imagine your head's probably all over the place at this point, because not only are you transitioning, he just left his job, so now you got to scramble to go back to the reserve so that you can provide for your 3 young ones, right? Because insurance is a big, we talked about that earlier, the adulting part of it. I didn't even know how insurance worked when I got out of the Army at 30
I was very
years
fortunate
old.
that when I sat down and talked to her about getting out at one point, or told her, hey, we got out, we're doing this. She was like, have you gone through the math of what it is you're leaving behind? Because I support you getting out, but I need you to think about it beforehand. And so we sat down and we did the math, and we're like, okay, if we do all these things exactly this way, we can get by until we do better, right? A lot of faith in our ability to do better. And honestly, I was like, surely the problem is that I am in the Air Force and I am the problem. He had me convinced I am 100% the problem. It's all me. Obviously, again.
And was he telling you that? Was he telling you that the Air Force was the problem, or just you in general and what you were choosing to do?
He was saying it was me, right? But I remember looking and being like, so you think that I'm out cheating on you, working 16 hours a day? And he was like, well, I don't know why else. He'd overheard some crew chiefs talking about me and apparently what they would like to do to me. And he said, you must be encouraging it. So I don't know if that's true or not. I never heard it.
It's not true. It's just how guys operate. They see a woman and they'll say things amongst themselves, right? It happens. I'm sure girls do that in their little groups too, right? Like, I would jump that man, right? And it sounds like he's just the type of guy that he understands that, but he sees it as an opportunity to use it against you.
Yes, very much so. And so he would constantly accuse me of stuff. And again, that was why I very much he thinks I'm still encouraging it. How do I stop it? So when that guy was like, hey, let's go to barbecue, I was like, fuck off. I'm not putting myself in that situation. If we had friends, they had to be friends that he made. And then.
So he basically structured every part of your life and what you were allowed to do or not allowed to do. And you kind of maybe just went along with it.
I did a lot, right? I pushed back to the point where he would frequently accuse me of being a Nazi, right? Because I'd be like, I see you spending money over here. What are you spending money on? Because we agreed that we're going to spend money on groceries this week, and now I don't have enough for groceries. What is this? And he was a heavy smoker and drinker at the time. And so he's like, oh, I did buy groceries. I bought cigarettes and beer. Like, what's.
Yeah, well, that's not fucking groceries. It's going to feed a 4, a 3, and a 6-month-old, right?
Yeah, and but gaslighting is a thing. I thought, surely this is me. There's something wrong with me. If I get out, we can work on our marriage. I can get to know my kids. It's going to be better. It resulted in a 2-year divorce. I worked, man, my poor kids. I signed up for full college courses, so 7 courses at a university here in Oklahoma. I worked 4 jobs. I did not.
So you were busting your ass to do what you needed to do to take care of yourself and your kids. I mean, that's admirable. That's awesome. Good for you.
Thank you, but nobody was parenting because my ex left. He left the state.
Yeah, and you're working 4 jobs to survive, so it's really hard to parent. Plus 7 full, college courses. I know what that's like because I do have a bachelor's and an associate's degree.
And so I mean when I talk to other women and they talk about, oh, you can have it all, you can go have a career and you can go to college, you can be a good mom. I'm like, something suffers. I know firsthand something suffers. I had straight A's. I was employee at the month at 2 of my jobs because I needed, like, both those things kept food on the table, right? One kept me my GI Bill income. The other one kept me, kept like insurance and whatnot and networking and opportunities. And there was a point where I worked at McDonald's again. That was one of my jobs. And I did it specifically for A, the flexibility, but B, the free meal that we got out of it, because it was the only meal I had for the day for a little while. But I met an incredible supervisor in the Guard who saw what I was going through in the reserves, and just how much I was struggling. And he goes, hey, I know you're thinking about getting out again. He goes, but I really think that if you join the Guard, it would be different. So give us a year. And if you still want to get out, I'll help you get out. Honorable discharge, no problem. And so I did. And best decision I ever made, because obviously I'm still in the Guard. But
right. As a lieutenant.
And he actually wrote one of my recommendations for commission letter.
And was he aware of all of the things that were kind of turning you off about the Air Force and just all the things you had been through? Did he see that, or did that kind of just not play a factor? He was just a great leader.
I didn't confide in him until he was my supervisor, but he saw me struggling with certain things that he's like, I don't like, this is not adding up, right? The behavior from a couple of the people in the reserves was very reminiscent of the behavior of the guys on active duty. And I think he saw that I was still very.
It sent you to that same place that made you shut down with your unit, and distance yourself and not want to talk to anybody. He was seeing that because of the behavior of some people. Right.
And so I think he recognized that I was very willing to change given some guidance. And so he did. There was a point where I really wanted to make tech, and I asked him, I said, what can I do better? And he said, no, you're doing all the things right. And I got passed over for tech. And I went to him and I said, you said I was doing all the things right. Why was I not promoted? And he goes, Tess, you have to do it for longer than 3 months. Like, you have to do it consistently over time. He goes, here are some things that, as we got to the boards, you kind of fell back on, or we saw this thing in you that you hadn't quite matured to the point where we thought it made sense. But he took the time to explain it to me. And he took the time to give me specific examples where he's like, you handled it this way, and I thought this way would have been a better way to do it. Oh my gosh, it was a 180 from everything that I had experienced. And Sergeant Willie, you changed my career. And Melissa, his wife, was incredible in showing me like what I could expect from a healthy relationship, because they just supported each other so much. And I still talk to them to this day. And I think they're a wonderful couple who I don't know what I would have done had I not met them. So there are plenty of great supervisors in the military. Just, you got to find them.
Shout out to Sergeant Willie for being a phenomenal leader. I don't know you, but clearly, this is a testament to what kind of leader you are, and the Air Force is lucky to have him.
Yeah, absolutely. Wonderful. He and his wife both just phenomenal people. I did make tech under his tutelage not long after. Yeah. Yep. And then
would you say that he might have had a pretty large part in you actively starting to work on yourself and do some of the work that you needed to do to kind of to better yourself? Or maybe he was like a catalyst that kind of showed you, well, like, there's work that I can do, and if I follow this man, he'll show me, how to do that work? Or what was that kind of catalyst? It sounds like that probably was a big influence. I confided
in him a lot as a kind of father figure who I couldn't admit to my dad that I had screwed up, right? I couldn't admit to my mom that I had screwed up. I the once or twice that I tried telling my mom, she had a reaction very similar to what mine would have been when I was younger, which was like, oh, it couldn't have been that bad, or you'd have handled it different. And so, Mom, I'm not finding fault. I love you very much. You've been very supportive. Like, but no, and I do. And so I don't want, but that was, and I understand her reaction now looking back, the same way that I understand the way my dad handled the divorce looking back after going through my own, right? There were things that my family is very critical of both parents. And I'm like, having been through both those things now, I get it. I hope I do it different. I don't think I have. My kids will be the determining factor in that later on in life, right? But but yeah, I finally get where they were coming from and how they ended up at the decision making that they did. And so I confided in Sergeant Willie a lot. And I remember there was a point where I was so tired of being in school and I was so tired of working 4 jobs. And I was like, something has got to give. And I had not deployed yet, not for lack of trying. One of the things that I faced was being accused of getting pregnant to avoid deployments. It didn't. Like, I'm like,
I remember deploying a bunch, and there was guys who would come back, because I deployed every other year. So for I mean, that's just the way it was. Orders when I was coming home for the next one, right? And it's like they would try to accuse dudes of intentionally getting their wives pregnant to get out of a divorce. I'm like, you just had this dude gone for 16, 17 months. Like, what did you think was going to happen? Because I could have told you that was going to happen. And you're giving this guy more grief than the guy who got a girl pregnant
right?
on deployment. Like, that's specifically forbidden under the general order. It's general order number 4 when you go overseas, right? Like the 3 general orders that we all know, and general order number 4, you will not have sexual intercourse with anyone while you're on deployment. Period. Right. End of story.
So yeah, and it just, my career just kind of worked out where, so Korea, you don't deploy. When I got to Aviano, I was already pregnant, and we just sent folks on deployment. So it didn't stop them. I got there the day before they left. It didn't stop them from being like, you got pregnant to get out of it. I was like, I'm 6 months pregnant, but sure, we'll go with that. Right, we didn't deploy at Aviano while I was there for the rest of the time because we changed missions. So we did an ORI right before I left. And then when I got to Holloman, we were standing up the F-22. So we had to go through the ORI again. But we were still standing it up. So we did an ORI right before I left active duty. And then I started going through the divorce when I got to Tinker with the reserve unit and then the Guard. And funny story, this is what, I mean, you say he's a catalyst, absolutely, because I couldn't keep up with the bills, even with all the jobs, because they were just, I was leading fitness instructor. So I'm $20 per class that I led there if I could go do it. I used it as a way to get my workout in. Like I said, I worked at McDonald's part-time. That was $7.50 an hour, maybe. And then I worked for Northrop Grumman part-time as a contractor. That was my highest paid income, I think maybe $13 an hour. And I would do that as often as I could. So, but it was all like based on whether or not they had work for me. So,
so you never really know.
And then my 4th job was the Guard. So 1 weekend a month. Right. And I was a staff sergeant / tech eventually. But I started volunteering for deployments, and all these people were getting picked up for deployments. They weren't our unit going. It was the onesie twosies to backfill. Excuse me. And I finally went to my flight chief. I was like, what am I doing wrong? Why am I not getting picked up for a deployment? He goes, I was wondering why I kept seeing your name on there. I was like, I'm volunteering. I need the cash. He goes, you just got through a divorce and got custody of your kids. If you need cash that desperately, we will figure something out. But you are not deploying. I was like, you can't choose that for me. He goes, I promise you, you will thank me later. So thank you. Thank you. That year they put me in for a unit, like, I don't know what you'd call it, but like fundraiser. And they paid my rent and they bought my kids presents so that they would have a Christmas. And then.
So now finally you're in a spot that values you and sees you for who you are and is doing what they're supposed to be doing to take care of, the community, right? Like I think that's an important thing to kind of talk about for a minute, because you've spent, I don't know, close to 9 years at this point experiencing something completely different from what you expected your experience with the military to be, and not close to 9 years. I'm just going to say 9 because I don't know the math, but it's 9 years, a decade goes by before you finally are like, holy shit, this is what it's supposed to be like.
And I still, very much didn't trust. I was like, is this some sort of a ploy? Like, where's the backstabbing come in?
Yeah,
Right.
what's the catch, right? What's the hook? Where is it? Because I know it's coming because that's what you've experienced before.
And I self-sabotaged a little bit in that unit. I did. There were some things that I did that my mom stopped talking to me for a little bit. Sergeant Willie was like, "Can you stop? Like, you're screwing up. Can you stop?" But because he didn't give up on me, and I did want to get better, and he was willing to mentor me. I was like, okay, how do I fix this? And he's like, we're gonna fix it. It's all right. So he helped walk me through how to fix it. I ended up working for the Guard full time for about 6 months before our mission changed again. We were selected to have a mission change that led me to look for a new position, and it was such an interesting experience when I needed the new position, because it really was a choice between, are you going to continue to make the same shitty decisions you've made thus far and allow people to take advantage of it, or are you going to do something different? And so the Guard had hired me. I worked for them for about 6 months. We had a mission change. And when they did the mission change, they said, we're not going to keep crew chiefs. We're going to hire a contractor. We're going to do L3. L3 said, we can't hire any of the current crew chiefs because it would be a conflict of interest. So my options were to go back to tech school, and all the positions that they had open were several weeks to several months. And I was like, okay, that single mom in it, not doing it.
It's clearly not going to work, right?
Yep.
Mama needs money.
And so I start applying for jobs all over the country, because at this point I'm willing to move. I just have to be able to take care of my kids. And I get 2 interviews and 2 job offers, and one is in Indiana, right next to my ex-husband.
We're at in Indiana, because I'm from there, and I don't really want to be associated with a piece of shit like your ex-husband.
Hey, I think it was Grissom.
So that's up north. I don't care about that. I'm from southern Indiana. Anything south of Indy, we're fine.
I won't say. But
yeah, that's probably fair, because there may be a chance I know some people still.
It's a small community. Turns out that my side of the family knows his side of the family. I was like, how is that even? It's so weird.
Oh boy.
But so I get a job offer there, and they said, if you come work for us, you're not going to be a tech, you're going to be a staff. And we can't offer you your current pay as a full-time. You're going to be, I don't remember what it was, but it was a WG something, right? That was another pay cut. And I thought we could try to co-parent. I was still very convinced that my marriage, I was the problem, but he could be a decent dad. And I was going to give him every opportunity to do it, because that's the right thing to do. And so I called him and I said, hey, I have a job offer in the area. If I take this job, I won't be able to afford to live on my own. Do you want to get a house together? We're not going to get back together. It would just be co-parenting, and we would just have some ground rules in place. Like, if you're going to date, you just don't bring anybody back to the house. And same goes for me. But we're going to co-parent. And he said, the only way you're getting anything from me is if you marry me again. And so I threw up in my mouth a little bit and hung up.
And, good for you. That's the right decision, because I kind of wanted to wring your neck for even considering.
And I was like, there's no way. Like, I can't ever go back to that now that I've experienced, like, what I remember thinking to myself as I divorced him, like, I would rather risk that I'm actually the heinous bitch that he says I am, and be alone for the rest of my life, and be okay with learn to be okay with who I am, than live every day with him telling me that I am.
Good for you.
And it's so funny, because I took the job in Lake Charles, Louisiana, and I met my now husband, and I was attracted to him right away. Like, it was so immediate. It was ridiculous. And it wasn't like,
And was he a
he was a
contractor as well?
contractor. I
Is
was a
that how this?
manager
And this is you taking the
down
job
in
with
Lake Charles,
Northrop,
Louisiana.
correct?
Yep. So at Depot, one of my favorite jobs. I did not like most of the people that I worked with there either. There were a couple of them that were great, but I walked in my red high heels and leopard print blouse and red lipstick, and all 400 men had a very similar reaction to what the Air Force did, which was what does this female think she is doing in here? And a couple of them let me know. They're like, we're not working for you. What makes you think you can tell me what to do? And I had enough gall at this point to look at one of them and go, did you apply for the job? And they're like, well, no, I didn't want it. I said, well, I did. And so here I am. So I guess we're going to have to figure out how to work together. And that really set the tone for the, the whole experience.
Good for you, though. Like, really good for you, because that's a lot of people who've been through what you go through would just kind of continue to believe that stuff. And so for your response to be, well, did you go through an interview process?
Yeah.
Right. And to just drop like, well, I did, and they hired me to do this job. So if you want to talk about it, go talk to the upper management, right? Like, you're stuck with me, and there's no option here. So you will work.
And actually, the thing that I did afterwards is I said, hey, I need you to stay after, because it was an introduction to the team. So he did that in front of 25 men that have 10 years on me, a ton of experience in a field it was sheet metal. My experience was 100% A&P, and I don't consider myself particularly good at that even. I am great at systems.
Yeah, and for people who don't know what A&P, that's airframe and power plant, correct?
Sorry.
Yeah. And that's when you get out into the civilian world, you have to get an FAA license to do. Do you guys get that in the Air Force as well? Is it FAA?
So we're not required to have one. A lot of guys don't end up with one and actually struggle to find work when they get out. I was very fortunate that I knew that was somewhere I needed to go. And Northrop actually got me my A&P.
Yeah, it's an expensive program. I remember being in flight school, and we had a partnership at Clover Park. I think it was with China. They would send all of their people over to do our A&P. It was A&P, and then you said there's systems, and it's avionics is a separate one too. Like, there's three big tickets that you're supposed to get, right? And you can make a lot of money turning wrenches on airplanes if you have all
absolutely.
three.
Like, and NDT is another one that is huge. Like, you can make millions apparently.
So that one is new to me. NDT was getting started when I was going through flight school. My flight school was standing up kind of NDT labs and all that. So I'm not even familiar what it is. I know it's non-destructive testing, but I just don't understand like what the whole mission behind it is. It's really cool.
They check for cracks and components. That's what I understand out of it. So
yeah, right. That's about all I understand too.
I've been to the shops and I've kind of seen what they do, and it's really neat. But I'm like, that's worth that much money? Geez Louise, I went in the wrong career field. But if you're money driven, NDT that can set you up apparently.
You also need to be really smart, just so you guys know. Like, that's not an easy school to go to, I promise, at all. But anyway, so he did this in front of 25 other people trying to establish his power base. And so you did the right thing as a leader and asked him to stay after. And I'm sure I can't wait to hear how this conversation went.
I had learned enough from Sergeant Willie and some other interactions where I said, hey, you are clearly an informal leader in this group, and these people are going to react to me however you suggest. And if you and I can't find a way to work together, I won't be successful. I don't have the experience you have. You're 50-something years old and have done structures from this area on this aircraft the entire time. I've never seen this airplane before. I've never done structures before. I would really appreciate if you would help me learn this airplane and how to do my job well. But I know I won't be able to do it without you. And his attitude towards me changed after that. He helped me a lot. Whenever he worked on my crew. So,
that speaks volumes about his character to actually take the time to listen to you, to swallow his pride, and then turn around and actually help you be successful. So, not a great first impression, but it sounds like pretty great
It was
relationship.
a decent relationship afterward. He was not my biggest fan, but he didn't hold me back either. I had people at that job that actively, they would after they would do a repair, we had to vacuum, right? You're supposed to vacuum everything up, can't have any debris anywhere, and they would actively dump their vacuums and fail FOD walks on purpose, trying to get me fired. So
Like, it's not obvious when there's this pile of dirt here that clearly was poured
right,
out from a
and
vacuum cleaner,
but
right?
my leadership was, I don't know, I just, early on I rubbed people the wrong way. I don't fully understand why, but I know I did. And so, and a lot of that was, I felt like I had the rules on my side, right? My husband nicknamed me the hall monitor. Like, I would follow the rules strictly. And so I felt like, well, I'm doing all the things right. What are you doing? And they would try to get away with some stuff. But now I look back and I'm like, well, had my relationships been with my coworkers, my peers, my subordinates, whatever, been better, they might have worked for me a little bit better. And I wouldn't have had to fight so hard to get them to follow the rules, because there would have been a mutually beneficial relationship, as opposed to leader and follower, or manager and subordinate, right? So that was something that I really I struggled with. But my now husband was one of the few people. He ended up being on my team. Um,
So
yeah,
you're his
and
boss. That's awesome.
well, he had a girlfriend at the time, and I had so much respect for him, because the way that I found out that he had a girlfriend was I actually had made a pass at him, and he was like, "I'm in a happy relationship." I was like, "Oh, you just never mentioned." And so he
Mentioned it,
goes, "Yeah,
right?
because it's nobody's business." He goes, "I'm in a happy relationship." And I was like, "Oh, well, I like you even more now." Crap. So, because yeah, he was
Funny how
so
that works,
respectful
right?
about it. And like, there's a point where at some point I understood that their relationship was on the rocks, but it was never because he came in and badmouthed her ever. I thought that was so incredible, because everybody knew my business. My ex-husband told everybody everything that was bad about me, so I thought that was really neat. And he honestly gave me so many pointers on structures. Like, he taught me about how to do a rivet, and how to hold a bucking bar, and how to, like, what an angle was versus, how to roll a skin, how to read an engineering schematic. And he helped me be successful at Northrop Grumman. But then also, as we got to a point where we actually got into a relationship, as theirs ended, ours began. And he has really helped rebuild. He took the time, right, to look at me and go, "Why do you have this belief? Why do you act this way? Why do you carry this around?" And when I would try to, like, I'm not looking at it, he'd be like, hey, I'm not going to baby you. You want to be in this relationship? I need you to step up and do better. So help me understand why you're behaving like this.
So I have chills right now, because your husband really was the one that forced you to do the deep work that you hadn't been doing. And he saw you for who you were and what you were capable of, if you were willing to move past whatever demons were plaguing you,
Absolutely. Like,
correct?
people say when I talk about him that I give him way too much credit, and he doesn't love that I talk about him so much. But I'm like, I don't think you understand how much you have changed my life. And he is the reason that I am able to be an entrepreneur at all, because he gave me the confidence back, right, to actually pursue it. There was a point where we're dating. I'm still working at Lake Charles. I'm not loving it anymore. I'm thinking it's time to try something different. And even that, like, he's like, "Why do you feel the need to move every 2 or 3 years?" Well, we finally addressed that recently. And so we're at the same spot going on year 3. And, I don't have the same itch to move that I usually have, because he helped me work through that.
Well, I hope not. If you're building this Italian themed,
So,
everything pole barn, or you said, is it a shed
oh,
or a pole
this
barn, or what's going up?
the cabin is going to be a very rustic
A
cabin that's
cabin.
going
That's
up.
what it
It'll
was.
be the first of many, but yeah, it's an adventure in and of itself, and we could talk about that in a little bit here. But
Hey, we're about
yeah,
to get there because you mentioned the E word, and I'm you through all the adversity and just everything. Your story is incredible, and a lot of people, I think, need to hear this, because this is an example of what I know is possible for veterans if they do the work on themselves. And your experiences, adversities, and traumas are your own, but that doesn't minimize anybody else's. And the process to get through all of that and out of it is the same, right? And
sorry, go ahead.
no, you're good. No,
Well, that's
you're
I think
good.
that's what I was saying earlier about you can absolutely categorize my obstacles. It they're your trauma or bad experience or whatever is not going to be the same as mine necessarily, but it doesn't change that it's something that you and I both need to figure out. Why did I react that way, and do I like the way I reacted, and do I want to change it, and how do I change it?
Well, and that's just it, right? Like, so while your trauma is different from my trauma, is different from Scotty, who I just talked to's trauma, who, from Sean's trauma, who I did a podcast with this morning. And, you know, it, the mechanism of injury may be different, but the way that it destroys you is the same for everybody. And the way that you beat it is the same, at least as far as I've been able to figure out in my healing journey, which is very relatively new. I mean, I'm very upfront about ayahuasca is what changed my life. It showed me where I needed to go, what I needed to do to get there, and that the work was going to be hard, but that I was capable of doing the work. It also taught me how to love and respect myself, which I had never done in my entire life, and it really made that clear to me. But moreover, I don't know. I talked with a really awesome guy from the Air Force. His name's Matthew Banco. I'm going to have him on my show eventually, and I was on his show as well. But our first conversation, he's got this philosophy he calls MEPS. There's a MEPS to get in, MEPS, right? Military Entry Processing Station, and there needs to be a MEPS to get out. And I think I'm almost positive he was the one that kind of came up with this. And if not, it was one of the guests he had on his show. But I asked him and have permission to kind of adopt this as part of my philosophy, because I really do believe that this is the path: mental, emotional, physical, social, spiritual, MEPSS, right? So we have a MEPS to get in, but we don't have that MEPS to work on those things that we need to get out. And, you know, that's the path to healing. You have to work on your mental health first, and your emotional health, and then your physical health. And the social health is incredibly important. And your spiritual health, whether people think spirituality and religion are the one and the same, they're not at all. I promise. I was never a religious person. I was forced to go to church as a child. I hated it. I grew up Methodist. I hated being treated like a child and having to go to Sunday school because I wasn't old enough to go to the big church and hear the sermon or whatever. But I'm very, very much a believer in a creator, if you will, or the spirit, or whatever you want to call it. I call it God. That's what I call it, but not in a Christian sense or a Muslim sense. It's just a powerful being sense. And I believe in the power of the universe now. And it's a big, big part of how I healed. And so, it's important to draw attention to these things, because however the mechanism of injury in trauma is different in all of us, the healing process is the same, and we all have to go through it to get to the other side. And you've done that clearly. You talk about your businesses, right? We're getting into that. You said your husband is a big, advocate for you being allowed, or not allowed, that's the wrong word, but just the capacity to and freedom to do and pursue that, right? And he supports that, and he sees you. And so let's talk about, was that meeting your husband, you guys start dating, he starts helping you not avoid and run away from those things, right? Is that when you were like, okay, it's time to do something for myself? I want to build this, and I want to, because I know you have the entrepreneurial spirit already because your father's an entrepreneur. So I'm sure over the years you're watching that happen, and like, I know I can do something like
So
this.
actually my dad opened his own business, did really well with it for a little while. And then actually had to go back into the workforce for a little while and only recently restarted. Um,
And that's okay, people. Like, I'm an outlier. I've structured my finances, no kids, just a wife, 2 dogs, so that I can do this full time, right? But if I was not in that position, and here very shortly, I might have to take up a part-time job just to be a little bit more comfortable financially. But if you're disciplined and you use that high leverage skill that you learned in the military in discipline, you can still build something that's meaningful. It's okay to have to get a job after you transition, but don't give up on yourself and what you truly want. And I think
right.
that's your
Yeah.
message, right?
So the biggest thing was watching him do that and saying like, okay, he's done it. He's done it once. He built it successfully. Something in his life changed where he needed to go back to work for a little bit. He did that very well, learned a lot because of it. And so if you need a chiropractor in Colorado Springs, Dr. Dave's Advanced Chiropractic, he's awesome. Best chiropractor I know. And that
I'll be
is,
out there in
he's
July.
awesome. And he has some really cool techniques and some cool stuff that he's picking up specifically because he wants to help people. Like he loves his job. He doesn't just own the chiropractic office. Like he is still there adjusting people every single day. His wife is at the front desk. So go say hi to them in Colorado Springs.
He's doing what makes him happy. Living life on his terms.
He's still my favorite
great.
chiropractor. Like I have, he lives in Colorado. I'm in Oklahoma. So I have chiropractors here. I have chiropractors in Texas and in Montgomery that I use when I travel. But he's still like the best chiropractor I've ever been to. And that's not just because he's my dad. So,
right. So when did the business thing start for you? When were you like, okay,
so I have to give my husband credit, and you guys may not care to hear this part, but there was a point where I called him while we're dating and I was like, hey, you're it. I'm moving in. You need to find us a house. He was like, I'm sorry. What? I was like, no, I'm going to quit my job. I'm going to go back to college. You're going to take care of me and my 3 kids. And we're moving in with you. He's like, okay. So he went and found us a house and I quit my job.
He no pushback. He just was like,
he was like, if that's what you think is the right thing to do, we'll try it. We'll see what happens. So yeah. Yep.
Hey, good for you, man. That's awesome.
He sent me back to college. And by that, I mean, like I used my GI Bill. He paid for the house. He took care of the kids. Like I have photos of him taking them to daddy-daughter dances and Halloween and whatever, because I'm studying.
I think this is great because my wife and I's relationship is a lot like this, and this is my 3rd marriage, and I will take all the credit for the first 2 based on the type of person and the person that I was then and my part in both of those. It's very, very not one-sided. It's definitely 2-sided, and I had my piece of it, but my wife and I's relationship is very much, I used to look at marriage as like a 50-50 thing. And it's not at all that. It's like a 90-10 right now. I'm 90% taking care of everything while my wife builds her own SEO agency and freelance career. And, she will be there when I need time, to not give the 90, and she'll pick up the 90. And it's this balancing act. And when you figure that out, and I think that's kind of what you're talking about, right? Like he was like, okay, you're going back to school. You're fucking doing this. There's not going to be any distraction. I will cover down until you're out of school, and we'll figure it out. Right?
Wonderful. And because of him, I got my degree. I didn't think when I joined, I wanted to commission. I got an invitation to apply for the academy the day after I found out I was pregnant with my first child. I was devastated. Jaden, I love you to death. It has nothing to do with being a mom. Because again, I was not a great mother for a little while there. So I don't ever want him to think like I just was not prepared. I was not ready. And so I was devastated though. And I thought, I'm never going to commission. I'm never going to get to do this. And when I graduated, I was like, okay, well, at least I graduated. I finished my degree. That was something I wanted to do. It took me 13 years, but I did it. And a position came open with my now guard unit at the 187th in Montgomery. And I thought, well, what the hell? I'll apply. I'll see what happens. And my commander who interviewed me goes, how the hell have I not met you before? Like, you got the job. I was like, I'm sorry. What just happened? He goes, yeah, you're commissioning. I,
Yeah,
I
right.
was so flabbergasted. Um, but that's so he went through college, got me to help me get to commission. I said, babe, I'm going to go to school for a couple months. I'm not going to be here. You got this? So he's like, yep. So, I mean, like, it didn't happen immediately. It opened up the door at Northrop Grumman, again, for another position with working on the Army SEMA program. So that was really cool. But you want to talk about career highlights? 2018 I graduate. 2020 I'm selected to commission. 2021 I go back to school for OTS, Officer Training School in Montgomery. And then it's during the pandemic, so he's fired for refusing to wear the mask. Um,
Yeah, I read that in your so he really like he stood his ground and held on to his values and beliefs no matter the cost. That speaks a lot about his character. There's not a lot of people in society today that will do that one way or the other, and I don't care which way it is, but just to stand on your morals and like, no, this is a line I'm not willing to let you cross.
So, and
That's
what I
awesome.
appreciated about it was he didn't just do it. He came to me beforehand and was like, "Hey, here's how I feel about this. What do you think?" And I said, "I agree. I don't think it should be something that should be forced on us." Right? He goes, "I don't want to wear my mask. I don't think it's necessary." I said, "If you don't want to wear it, don't wear it." He said, "They might fire me. Are you good?" And I said, "Yep. I guess it's my turn to hold down the fort." And so
I love that
so
so
but he
much.
did. I think he lasted. It was a couple of weeks of just not wearing it before somebody went and complained, and so you need to put your mask on, and he was like, no. So they're like, well, we'll give you 24 hours to think about it, and he's like, no, I'm not wearing it. So if you got to fire me, fire me. So that was it. That was as I was finishing up OTS. So my mom had come to stay with us to help make sure that kids were taken care of so he could go to work. They're being homeschooled at that point because they shut down the schools. And then I get orders to tech school at Shepherd Air Force Base for 4 months. My mom has moved back out to go do her own thing. He has not recovered a job because she's got to go. She's right. She's got to go do her thing. My mom's got to go do her thing. The kids are still being homeschooled. And I said, well, do you want to come to school with me and we can try to figure this out? And he's like, well, yeah, I can homeschool the kids and we'll all just go to Texas. That'll be an adventure. So I called my commander and said, hey, can I take my family with me? He said, yeah. And then I went back and said, all right, now that all that's in place, how do you feel about putting our house on Airbnb? My husband was like, what? We have like 3 weeks before we leave. How are we going to get this ready for Airbnb? Like, doesn't the house have to be nice? So we have a nice house. We had a nice house, but it was lived in, right? So in over the course of the next 2 weeks, we loaded up everything that was personal and hid it in our attic and locked the attic. And and as we were leaving, pulling out of our driveway to go to tech school, our first guest pulled in. And it was so weird because as we're leaving, he's like, hey, I think I forgot something. Can you go knock and ask the guest if you can get this thing? And I was like, yeah, okay. So we go and knock, and the guest is there with his feet up on our couch, like watching television, flipping to the channels, like, oh yeah, it's good. Come on in. And I was like, this is the strangest feeling ever.
That's weird,
Yeah,
right?
like
That's
he's gonna
kind of
sleep
weird.
in our bed. We just bought new mattresses for everybody, thankfully. So he's gonna sleep in our bed, and his kids are gonna sleep in our kids' bed. It was so weird.
And so is that the birth of a business?
So that is
Is
the
that the birth of
introduction to
Billets?
short-term rentals, and I was like, I kind of like doing this. This is kind of great. But we get to tech school, and they put us in a hotel. I was like, this is not gonna work. So like at first we're on base and they're like, we're not expecting you to have family, so we don't have room for you. We actually stayed a night in the officers' training dorms, which I got fined for and got in trouble. Because I was like, I can't find it. I'm enlisted my whole career, and you always go where they tell you to go, and like, I just no concept of stretching the rules at all. No understanding of what the rules were. I finally went and read the JTR for the first time ever, and was like, oh, I am allowed to stay off base. What is this shit? So like, we book a hotel room off base. We're watching the prostitutes walk out next door. And I was like, this also is not going to work. So I went to my class and I said, hey, what are you guys doing? They said, oh, we're doing a crash pad. I was like, what is a crash pad? Like, oh yeah, you can just book somebody's house like an Airbnb, but the one that we're at is owned by a prior pilot. I was like, I didn't even know this was a thing. How do I find this?
Yeah, that's a common thing in the aviation world, right? So yeah, pilots, they want to, the best part about being a pilot is you can be based anywhere and commute to work. And what a lot of people don't know about commercial airline pilots anyway is, particularly when you get to the legacy airlines, Alaska, Southwest, Delta, American, you get what's called reserve time, and you're on it for a while. My buddy has been hired at Alaska for 2 years now, and he still doesn't hold a line. And until he moved back to Oregon, because he's based in Portland, he was living in Knoxville, where he was flying for a regional airline in PSA. And he had a crash pad out there because he had to get his stuff all in order. It's a super common thing. And they save a bunch of money because now you're not spending a ridiculous amount of money on hotel rooms to be out on reserve for 4 days or whatever the trip is. And yeah, so I didn't realize that Billets took inspiration from the crash pads.
So my class was in this great 8-bed, 8-bath mansion 15 minutes north of the base with like a pool, and they'd set it up like it had a poker table and darts and pool table and whatever. So I was like, well, that's not going to work for my family. How'd you guys find it? And they said, well, we Googled. So I Googled and Googled and Googled and Googled and emailed and called and hoped somebody would get back to me at the last minute with room for a whole family to rent at the base rate, which was $85 a night. And we finally found something, and that was the birth of Billets, because I was like, this should not be this difficult to find. And we bought our first house, investment property there, with the intent to turn it into crash pad. It was the very first billet. So it's still, you can still go rent it today. It's in Wichita Falls, about 8 minutes to the main gate. We do have openings for this summer.
So essentially, just for all those listening, Billets is basically just crash pads for people who are on temporary duty assignment that can't find something that meets a standard that they're looking for, essentially.
The way I describe it is we're like Airbnb, but for the DoD. So, and the reason I make that caveat is because we went and looked at other crash pad websites, because of course you want to see if somebody's already doing it, I just want to support it.
Right. This is called market research.
And what I found was I really didn't like the way that the other websites did it. It was very exclusive. You had to know somebody to get anybody to respond, to let you into the inner circle to list, right? And I felt like that really limited the business model, because there are plenty of people who would love to get compliant and list. But the other thing that it did was it doesn't build trust within the community when you've got 52 different crash pad pages and nobody knows who they're actually talking to. Or which house they're going to get. And then on top of that, you still have to email somebody and hope that they get back to you. And you don't know what it is you're getting, right? Like you just say, oh, I'm going with these dates. I'm going to bring my family or not bring my family. I want to bring a pet, not bring a pet. And then somebody emails you back and say, hey, we have these options. So when we built the website, we wanted it to feel like Airbnb, in that you go put your dates, you go put whether or not you're on orders, you go put whether or not you need or have a non-availability letter. We can't get you a non-availability letter, but not everybody needs one to get the per diem rate, right? Who you're traveling with and whether or not you've got pets. And based on that input on the front end, you get homes that have availability for those dates, and you can scroll through all the photos, select the one you like. And if the host has instant book turned on, you can instant book. If they don't, you send a request and they approve or disapprove with whatever reason. And then same thing for the host side. We wanted it to be really simple, that if you're willing to get compliant, we want to have you as an option. And so the host goes in and clicks, I want to be a host. And we walk you through step by step. It's 7 or 8 pages, very much like Airbnb. You put in your address, give us a description. We tell you on the first page, like, this is step one of getting compliant to list with us so that you can actually host somebody. And the other reason that we did this was there were so many people that were booking Airbnbs and then they were coming out of pocket for taxes and fees. All of our receipts are itemized in a way to ensure that your taxes are covered. So again, we went and read the joint travel regulation, and there's another layer to that. So the risk that people take by doing an Airbnb, even if your host is willing to do the receipt so that it's compliant for the defense travel system, is that there's an audit, and at some point they realize that you don't have that second component, which we walk you through how to do that. So that second component is a FEMA ID, and those two things are the absolute bare minimum to stay at one of those homes. And not every Airbnb has one. Not every crash pad has one, because people have discovered what crash pads are and how to make money on them. And they just sign up like it's an Airbnb. There's no qualifications. There are. And so Billets is trying to build that trust between the military and DoD community. So we've gone to symposiums and met with the National Defense Transportation Association, and I forget what DITMO is, but DITMO and JTR Riders, and said, help us understand what we need to do to be compliant. And we're one of the only, they said, they're like, we can't officially say like you're the go-to company, but if we were allowed to, you're the only one that we know of that is actually compliant.
Okay, so you're hearing it here first on the Strategic Veteran. Billets is the only people doing this to get you certified to participate in this program for, TDY guys on the DoD side of things.
Yeah,
basically.
so we
That's what
can't
you're
book
saying.
federal employees yet because we're not in DTS, but our mission is by the end of this year to be in DTS. So if you're one of those people that's worried about booking outside of DTS, January 1st, 2025, go search Billets in DTS. You should see our homes listed there.
That's amazing. So talk us through the business model. How do you guys make money? Are you making money on a percentage of the bookings? Are you making money on teaching people how to get compliant and walking them through that? Like, how are you sustaining yourself with this business, and what do you see the business, how do you scale something like that?
So honestly, look, I jumped into it head first because I knew if I continued to analyze it, the analysis paralysis, and I would never do it. So I just kind of threw money at it at first and went with it. So there was not, people were like, let's see your business plan. I was like, there's a plan? It's news to me.
Yeah, same. I don't have that either. I need to take action. I don't need to sit around and analysis paralysis, right? Like, just massive action will get me the answers I need. It might be painful, but
yeah, so there was
so
a lot.
worth it.
There was a lot of learning that went into that. Like, first of all, I had hosts that said, you have got to offer certain things or I don't want to list with you. And I realized that they weren't my early on target market. Not that I needed to offer those things, because they want to compare me to Airbnb because I say we're like Airbnb. And there are certain functionalities that we want to bring in that I think Airbnb did really, really well. But there are certain things that people hate about Airbnb that I don't want to replicate. So they launched at the DNC. So another thing is, if you couldn't tell by some of my conversation, I am a little bit more conservative leaning in the way that I view things. And that's not to say that I am a conservative, but I believe in capitalism. I believe in objectivism. I think we get the most fulfillment of going out and doing and building. And that's the only way to really, truly be happy. And so I want to go build something. And I was kind of disappointed when I started looking into Airbnb and I saw that they launched at the DNC. But they brought in millions to launch with, millions, because it was for Obama's presidency, his campaign. And so 50% went to the campaign and 50% went to launching Airbnb. So they want to compare my business to that. And I'm like, no, this is bootstrapped off of my enlisted and Air National Guard income. So,
well, and it's also not, it wasn't born out of trying to raise campaign money. And I don't do the politics thing anymore at all, period. It's not worth my energy, time. It's two sides of the same coin. I think what you're saying goes even deeper than that. And you're building something that serves others. It's very much not about getting rich for you. Because I had to ask you how the business makes money because I want to understand the model, right? And so you never once said anything about money. You never once said anything about, oh, this was our ticket to the comfortable life. What it was for you is you identified a problem, and then pretty early on identified a completely separate ICP, right? Like, who am I trying to target for these houses? Because I don't want to deal with these shitty people over here who have demands. I want to deal with kind-hearted, generous people who understand what I'm trying to build and want to be a part of helping other people. Is that
Exactly. And
pretty
so
spot
all of our
on?
hosts, most of them could make more money listing on Airbnb, but agree to take the lower rate to ensure that a military member has somewhere to stay with their family that they know is safe, clean, and is going to be compliant so that they're not coming out of pocket to meet their basic needs that the military said that they would cover. So the way that we make money is very similar to Airbnb. We didn't want to do what Furnished Finder and some other folks did, where you have to pay a fee up front, because we weren't sure that two things, right? So we weren't sure we were going to get bookings right away. We knew there was going to be pushback because there's a lot of misinformation about what you can and can't do. Like me, I didn't know I could stay off base. So when people say, oh, you can't do that, you and I have talked before, like I was wasting energy on Facebook trying to explain that you can't do that. Please trust me. Don't sabotage this.
Yeah, the cesspool that can be Facebook. Yeah, since we've talked too, I've just kind of come back around to the fact that like the target audience is on Facebook, and I'm gonna have to go there and deal with that at some point, right? But I almost welcome it at this point because hate actually makes you grow twice as fast as like the good stuff. I think maybe you might have a little experience with that.
Yeah, absolutely. If my life had been easy, I was so arrogant at 18. I'd have been an asshole. So
and so Billets is the primary focus
at the moment.
For you, correct?
So because of Billets and how much I've enjoyed finding this different mission, we've started the Billets Foundation. It just launched. It's maybe a month old, and we just got like our EIN back. But so we realized in building this that there was a secondary need. So real quick, 10%, we take 10% of all bookings. So we only make money when you make money. That was, I needed to say that or I won't ever come back around to it. So just like Airbnb, we take a percentage of your booking. That covers our cost to stay up and continue to develop. Out of that, we do something similar to air cover. Air cover is where if something in your house as a host gets damaged, you can file a claim with them if the guest isn't willing to cover it, and they'll cover a certain amount to have it repaired. We pay. Right.
So it's like insurance.
A warranty. It's a damage waiver. So we encourage all of our hosts to have their own insurance. We love Proper Insurance. That's our partner for insurance. We did our due diligence and went and said, this is really the best product out there for our hosts. And that's who we recommend.
So you guys even partnered with an insurance company, which means you're probably getting a percentage of that.
When we send people over, we can get a kickback. We're not big enough yet I guess it's not called a kickback in business speak.
It's usually a commission, honestly, is what it is. They'll give you and insurance companies are very generous with their commission because they're about volume. So I don't know really how it works in the property and casualty side, and that's the side you're talking about right now, more like errors and omissions. But on the life insurance side, it's not uncommon. Within 6 months of being in the industry, you'll be making 85% of whatever.
Yeah. So we are not quite big enough to have earned significant income from that, but it is something that Proper has said, like when you get to that point, we'll be very happy to make sure that it's worth your while to send people our way.
And for sure, that's usually how insurance companies will do it. I've never heard of them starting anybody out at like zero, but in the life insurance world, like 50%, you write so much business, it bumps up 15% to 65. You get another so much business, then it's really easy to get to that 85, 90% commission mark because you're doing all the work. They're not doing anything. You're just bringing in and selling the policies, and they're taking the 10%
you and I might have to
from
talk
you.
Offline some more. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. Anytime. That's what I'm here for. I mean, it's part of the reason I kind of hid an agenda of mine to start this show is it's like a masterclass in business for me. And I get to network and learn things for myself, but also like get to expose people's stories and show veterans like what's possible for you if you really do the work on yourself and get out of your own way and just take some action and really, focus and use your
Yeah.
discipline, right?
Well, and so the discipline part, right? Going in and knowing where and how to apply it. But one of the biggest benefits that we have that some people know how to utilize and others just really don't is the network that we come out with, because nobody else has experiences like we have. They just don't. And even with as poor as some of my experiences were, nobody else understands being an Air Force crew chief like another Air Force crew chief. It doesn't matter if it's a guy who has not been through the shit that I've been through. He knows how hard it is to be out there busting his knuckles in the heat, in the cold, making the same pay as the finance guy who can screw up your paycheck all day for the next 6 months while your wife's threatening to leave you because your paycheck's not coming in and she hasn't seen you in however long, and they're getting ready to deploy you, right? Like, nobody else knows that like another veteran. So regardless of what my relationship at the time with certain people was, I want to support that community because I do know what a struggle it can be to move with a family and try to have a healthy relationship and feel like you're a part of a community sometimes when leadership isn't taking great care of you. There's a huge housing problem right now in the military. There's a huge lodging problem in general in the military. I've had several commanders reach out when they found out what Billets was and say, do you think you can help us solve the lodging problem? And I went, do you understand what we do? Like, I don't build houses. I'll come build a house for you. But that is not what we do. Like, if you need to put airmen up in our houses, we can do that. Are you preparing them to move off base before you just stick them in somebody's home? So we have a huge opportunity there to fill a gap. That's really neat. But
that's really cool. Yeah, that's a big gap. That's a life-changing gap probably, because nobody's doing what you're doing. So that's a huge opportunity for Billets to really establish
what
it
is so
is you're
funny that you
trying to
mentioned
do,
Billets,
right?
because my immediate thought was like these airmen, like it was airmen in particular that we were reached, but it was for a joint base. So it would be Navy and Army as well, in particular at this base, that they're trying to help. And I was like, how are you preparing them to move out onto the economy into somebody else's home on a short-term lease until you find them something different? And then are you preparing them to utilize their VA loan in a way that's beneficial to them? Because instead of just continuing to pay the huge hotel who is doing just fine without us and actually is losing money, can we put it back into the airman's pocket who would benefit from this significantly by utilizing his VA loan and then house hacking and renting out his 2 extra rooms to his buddies at $85 a night?
Man, so they're pointing out problems that you now get to just go solve with your business. And it's like, that's the cool part about when you start building something and you just take massive action, right? You don't have any idea what direction it's headed. Most of the time, you don't have a fucking clue what you're doing.
Oh yeah,
right?
I had
Would
no
you agree
clue.
with that?
None.
Like, honestly, but as you, for me, this has been very much my experience, and I'm fairly certain just hearing you talk, this is your experience as well. For me, it looked like start posting on LinkedIn. Well, I don't know what to post about, so I'll start personal branding, which is really funny because now I'm coming back around to building a whole personal brand, but that wasn't working. So I started posting about like, what is my wife doing? And I'm not into SEO. I know enough to be dangerous, but I started posting a little bit about that. And through that, I'd start meeting people. People would find me interesting and they would message me, and then we would jump on a call. And then before you know it, I'm part of a community where I'm getting mentorship from people who are making $1 million a year with a newsletter. And then, I'm meeting at Disney Springs with a guy who runs a couple of newsletters that make a lot of money. And he's telling me like, hey, dude, you need to do this. And then the podcast is born, and I'm not sure about it, but now it seems to be doing, hopefully well, right? Like you said, you listened to the first episode, you agreed to be a guest on the show. So there's clearly, a lot of good things happening here. And it's just a testament to, I still don't really know what I'm doing. I've got, I don't know, after this one, I'll have 11 that need to be edited. I have another 19 on the calendar to record. And I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm figuring it out as I go. And I really think I say all of that to say that through taking the action, things just start appearing, right? Like you just kind of, for me, like the prime example right now I can give you is YouTube is obviously a huge platform for video just in general, but the way you grow a podcast, other than having a bunch of guests, putting a bunch of episodes out on a consistent basis, and guesting on other people's podcasts, is taking long form content, chopping it down into 3 or 4, 10 to 25-minute videos, making 3 to 5 shorts of each one of those videos, and then just releasing it all the time. Every day something is posting somewhere, and just existing harder. My mentor, that's what he calls it: exist harder than anybody else. With or without you energy, exist harder than anybody else. And you just spoke to it. Like DoD came to you thinking you could build houses, identified all these fucking problems that you can now capitalize in your business.
And so the interesting part is, again, so my experiences left me lacking in any ability to network. And so what building this business has forced me to do is attempt to network. And I still, I trust my husband probably more than I should, like any human being. But I don't trust most anybody else. It's really difficult. And so like, even coming on here, I had misgivings where I was like, how much do I share? Because again, it's not a pity party. It's a lessons learned. And how much can I share and still have it be effective for somebody who didn't have a similar experience? Because I want this to be a great podcast for you too, right? I want you to have it be something that is effective for your entire audience and everybody can get something out of it. And hopefully, doesn't end up with a poor opinion of me in the meantime, right?
Nobody's going to have a poor opinion of you. And the important thing to remember is the way that we do accomplish what we set out to do is by telling our stories, because our stories have power. And, we talked before we started recording, and you are coming around to joining female veteran groups. And I'm with you. It's weird to kind of separate ourselves into different groups, but I just was invited to join a men's combat veteran group, and I can't tell you how beneficial it's been. I was very apprehensive because, especially with, what's going on in society, right now, the stigma behind men
so
in general.
Unfortunate. It's so dumb.
But just like to even hear men's group or men's work, and it's like, oh shit, like what is this? And, how is this going to affect the brand and all of that? But it's very much like, for me, it's a psychedelic group, just to preface that, but that's become a huge part of my life because of the experience and the work that goes on in there. And nobody's on psychedelics, but talking about your journey and talking about what you learned, and then just the space to be vulnerable without judgment, I think is important. Right. And I think we tend to do better at that when we are in groups of our peers. So for me, that's combat men, right, that were in the infantry. For you, that is the veteran women who have had similar experiences to you, right? And it's speaking to what you're talking about the networking, because you do need to find community when you get out of the Army, and you do need to network. It's so essential. It's that social part of MEPS, right?
It's interesting because the people that have the experience that I need to tap into, like talking to people like you, right, where you've gone, your wife does SEO, and you mentioned the insurance experience, and I don't have, my understanding of insurance is yelling at TRICARE and trying to get them to pay something I need them to pay, right?
That was mine until I got into the industry, right? You don't know what you don't know until you meet people who either have been there and have the experience, or you try it yourself. I've tried a million different things before I landed on, I'm leaning hard into the podcast. That's what I'm good at. That's what I'm going to do.
So I had to relearn any kind of social skills. I had to relearn filtering, because I'd gotten to the point where like everybody was blocked. Nobody was trusted. Nobody got in. And so then it was really interesting kind of navigating, like trying to hire somebody for tech, because there were a couple times where I lost some money where I paid somebody, and my husband's gonna be going, why did you hire this person? Like, he's getting red flags, right? But he's going, you have to learn this on your own, because otherwise you're going to rely on me to filter. And I don't want you to rely on me to filter. And so, the discipline to make myself go do this thing that was incredibly uncomfortable embarrassing sometimes. There are recordings now of podcasts where I was like, oh, like I wish I could take that back, but I can't. It's out there, right? And so then I just have to address it like I did the ADPI podcast. And I said, we're going to do all these really cool things, and the website's going to do this awesome thing. And then this guy that I hired, who I'm super excited about, and took my money and ran, and the website still isn't where I promised it was going to be. We're a year and a half later. So is it going to get there? Yeah, I'm learning along the way. So anybody that's a host with me that's looking forward to all these benefits, we're still building them. We haven't stopped, but it really has been I learned how to build an LLC and how to do an EIN and how to get a bank account and establish business credit and get the right kind of insurance.
Do you have
Do
a
what?
Dun & Bradstreet number?
I
Do you have the
do.
Duns
I
and
do. I
Bradstreet
learned
number
that
yet?
one. Yep.
See?
Yep.
Yeah, right. Because I'll tell you, when I learned how to form an LLC, I like started looking at the state website and I was like, nope, fuck that. I'm not doing it. I paid Inkfile to do it for me. It was
So
way
to be
hell worth
transparent,
it,
I
right?
had
Like
the first one I paid corporate direct because I had gone and listened to Kiyosaki. I probably just butchered his name. Yep. Yeah, Rich
Robert
Dad Poor Dad,
Kiyosaki.
right? And then I listened to that and I was like, well, that makes a lot of sense. And so I listened to several other of his, and he had the one about how to form an LLC and why and how to run it. And the gentleman who did that book has corporate direct. And so I paid them because I got a discount if I mentioned, Rich Dad Poor Dad, for them to start my LLC. So they started my first two for me. I've tried a couple others on recommendation from groups like, Active Duty Passive Income or Military to Millionaire. And eventually I have 10 of them now that operate doing different things. But through the first 3 or 4, I learned how to do it. And so if you asked me to go start an LLC now, I could give you step-by-step how to do it, get your EIN, open your bank account, make sure that you file your annual report, do your taxes, right?
Articles
Yep,
of organization.
exactly,
Yeah, all
exactly.
that.
So,
Yeah.
but I hadn't heard of half of that before I started, except for what was mentioned in the books. So, it really has been, I had the idea in 2021. We launched the first website in, I think it was August 2022. We thought we were going to launch the second website in April of 2023. That didn't happen. Put our heads down, did some more learning and networking and really trying to understand where I was, and not failing, right? Where I could do better though. Right.
Just weak, right? Like weak because it's a skill you haven't put the reps in it yet, right? You can't be strong at something without ever having done it. And I think it's important to delineate that, right? Because that's not really a failure. And kind of, it is, but it isn't. Like paying a dude to do your website and he's running away with your money. Like, yeah, you can consider that a failure, but that's a lesson that you were only going to learn by paying someone to run away with your money for your website, right? Like it's going to happen. It's going to happen to every single person in business. Somebody's going to fuck you with money. Somebody's going to fuck you with their time. Something's going to happen. And it's the lessons that come out of that and how you react to them. Okay, lesson learned. Or, okay, well, this fucking sucks. I don't want to build a business anymore. I quit. Back to corporate America.
Yeah,
to be
and
miserable.
so it's interesting because again, we're still building, but we've changed our marketing tactic and who we're reaching out to establish mentorships with. And by we, I mean me. It's still a one-person show other than the person who's building. I hired a CTO, and it was because I had gone to an entrepreneur podcast where you got to do a little bit of one-on-one afterwards by sending in questions. And so I didn't get to talk to the person directly, but if my question was chosen, they would answer it. And my question was chosen on one of these. It was a tech startup, and the guy is working at Microsoft, and he's describing like how difficult it is to get a good developer to come work at a startup because they know there's no money in it and there may never be money in it, right? Especially if you don't have backing like we don't. And so I said, okay, so how do you get them to come work for you? He goes, well, if you can't get a developer to come work for you, your idea must not be very good. I was livid. I was so pissed. But I used it when I called my now CTO and said, they told me my idea must not be very good if you wouldn't work for me for free. So, but here's my idea. So we agreed to a future amount.
So, that's super important because that's the place I'm in right now. I realize what I've got here, I think. And I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I do think that I have something here as long as I continue to pour fuel on the fire and do the things that, need to be done. And we'll probably at some point on this show talk about all of those things. But, I need a marketing guy and I need a brand, guy like to really keep me focused in. And I think that's important because for a long time I know I needed this stuff, but I was afraid to ask. And exercising your ask muscle is so important because you will find people that will do work for you for free as long as you are, a genuine human, demonstrate your work ethic and where you're going. They will, and they'll do it in a heartbeat without even the thought of money. We'll figure out compensation later. But I see what you've got here. I see what you're building. It resonates with me. Let me ride the coattails too, right? Like, and we all get there faster. And I think I'm so glad you brought that up because it's so
it is
important.
really hard to ask somebody to come work for you for free. Like that was a really big hurdle. And then, but that particular podcast kind of gave me the verbiage that I was looking for, right? Like, well, if I don't have a good idea, then I guess nobody's going to work for me. And this guy was like, he's like, all right, let me review your idea. We went out to dinner with, my husband, my son, and then his wife and him. And we all went out to see like, this is going to be kind of a long-term partnership. Can we work together? And we all kind of agreed that we like each other enough to try to make the business work. And so he has a small percentage of the company with a future payout determined. And he's been very flexible with payout because, like I said, we haven't had the bookings I was hoping that we would have, which is, again, that's a shortfall on my part for how I was marketing. I was disappointed that the site wasn't where I wanted it to be. And so I would say, oh, it's going to have all these cool things. And people would be like, well, then hit me up when it has all those cool things, right?
So you kind of walked yourself into an overpromise, underdelivered kind of situation. But again, it's a lesson you can only learn about marketing by trying to get out there and market, right? Like you're not going to know that unless you get lucky and have somebody who's really great at marketing in your network who like warns you of that first. So you're hearing it here first. If you are interested in building a business and you start marketing, the worst thing you can do is overpromise and underdeliver.
Yeah, and it was really hard to face. Like, so people were like, hey, you promised all this stuff. When's it going to be there? And so the next part was going back and going, hey, I know I said all these things. I really appreciate you bearing with me and being an early adopter and bearing with me as I learn this. So, and I've gotten on phone calls with numerous hosts where I've been very transparent and said, hey, I told you from the get-go this was a startup. I thought I had hired somebody that this was going to be, they had set dates. We had milestone dates and it looked like we were meeting them. And so I apologize for over-promising and under-delivering. But and I understand if you want to leave our platform, but I appreciate so much what you've done so far. And here's how I think together we can get you to that next booking and get you, to where we're both getting what we want out of the relationship again. And so to our guests, what we tell them is we are in limited locations. We have about 50 active listings still today. That's kind of where we left off a year ago. I stopped marketing because I knew I wasn't doing it well. And I really wanted to learn more before I went and committed more. And I wanted to make sure that I didn't need to pivot, right? I wanted to make sure that as I marketed this, we were going the right direction. And so in hiring the new CTO, it gave me a little bit of confidence again to keep marketing and then start bringing people on, and then talked to some different folks about how I can market differently. And so to our guests, what we say again is we have limited, but we're always trying to grow. So we have onesie twosies in about 20 states, around 25 bases. And so long as you let us know that you're looking, we'll go reach out. We had a naval officer reach out yesterday, and he said, I need something in Fredericksburg, Virginia, or surrounding area for 30 plus days. And so I don't have any hosts there. If you are looking to host, right?
Yeah,
so
if you're a host,
so understand though that
here.
we're not Airbnb. We are different. You have to get in order to list with us right now, we don't do civilians yet. At some point we hope to, and we hope to welcome veterans at some point, but we're not there yet. So where we're at the moment is if you're in Fredericksburg, Virginia, or if you're in Wichita Falls or one of those areas, we're looking for hosts around schools because that's where we get the most requests. High PCS stations, San Diego, California, a couple in Hawaii, and again, Virginia, like our number one request. Tampa, Florida is another one that we get a lot of requests, and we don't have a ton of hosts there.
I'm going to buy a house in Tampa
Yeah,
tomorrow.
but do our calendars sync? Not yet. They just we're not there yet. So you have to manually manage it. The downside is also the upside. The downside to our website is that it is so new that we don't have a ton of bookings yet. So it's really easy to manage your calendar. So when you get a booking on Airbnb, just go close your calendar on Billets. The upside is that you're going to help build something that at some point you're going to have more bookings than you know what to do with. And I know this because I go to the symposiums, I go talk to the airmen, I go talk to the soldiers, and they're like, I would love to have this as an option. Let me know when you're in DTS, or I would love to have this as an option. Do you have anything in this location? I can't tell you the number of times that when people hear about us, they go, hey, do you have something in this location? And I'm online checking to make sure we do or don't have a host. And I'll post on our Billets Facebook page and be like, hey, looking for hosts in this area. Like Colorado Springs in October, we have a family that's going to be looking for something for 4 months. And again, it's that per diem rate. So whatever the per diem rate is in your local area. If you don't know what it is, hit us up. We'll tell you what it is. I know how to find it. So like we'll walk you through how to get compliant, how to make money with it, help you choose a target, whether it's family or individual airmen on TDY, or and evaluating that as well. So.
And so this also solves kind of a bigger problem. I remember when I left Fort Stewart in 2011, I still had a house and I had to worry about trying to rent it, and Airbnb wasn't a thing yet. And, it was a nightmare trying to deal with a shitty property manager all the way across the country. I went to the other corner of the country. So, it's solving a problem for active people as well, right? Like now you can list it on your site, especially if you're in one of those high traffic areas, and know that you're going to be able to maintain this asset, right? Like, and not have to scramble to try and sell it, or not end up in a situation like I was in where, I couldn't get enough rent because I bought a house in 06, and then we know what happened in 08, right? So now, I'm losing, I think at most, at its worst, I was losing like $250 a month. So I had enough rent to cover everything but $250 of the mortgage with insurance, because all that changes when you rent a property. But then, a year goes by, everything's gravy, right? Whatever. I'm paying the property manager 10%. I'm not hearing anything. I haven't had to fix anything. That's great. And then all of a sudden she calls me out of the blue one day. Your tenant hasn't paid rent in 3 months and I'm done managing this property. And I'm like, what am I supposed to do here? I'm getting ready to go to Afghanistan, and now I'm going to have to pay a mortgage, and I'm not getting BH because at the time I was married, living on post, because we didn't know anything about Fort Lewis at all. And if you know that area, it's huge. There's a lot of bad places to live and a lot of not so great places to live. And no, I think Billets is awesome, and I appreciate you coming on here, because when we talked the first time, I wasn't super clear on what the model was or what you were trying to do with it, but now it makes so much more sense. So
the second part of our vision is to be the premier choice for the military when they PCS or TDY as far as short-term rentals go, right? One of our missions, though, is to educate folks on the opportunity to do a short-term rental for multiple reasons, right? There is the opportunity for financial freedom. There's the because maybe it's just an investment portfolio, right? And people are going to keep PCSing and go TDY. In fact, I saw a post this morning that the Army is doing away with distance learning. Well, if they do away with distance learning, where they still have to do the training, it means they're sending people somewhere. So where are they going to stay? Well, the other thing that you might not know is that the Army has privatized lodging, but the Air Force, Navy, and Marines actually owe a plan to the DoD for what they're going to do with theirs. They owed it 2 years ago and haven't come up with anything. But they've started.
Well, so it's funny. I was going to ask you about that because I live really close to Patrick Space Force Base, right? And we bought a house here in September of last year. We looked for like 18 months with all the crazy shit going on in the housing market, whatever. That's a story for another day. But one of the options, because we were so frustrated at just really basically having to overpay for something that wasn't worth it. Patrick, actually, I didn't know this. If you're a veteran, particularly retired, you can go live on post. And I looked into it and they're like, sorry, no, we're putting the kibosh on that because we don't have enough houses for our active duty guys that are here. And I was like, I didn't even know the Army doesn't do anything like that. If you're living on post, you are active duty Army, period, end of story, separated by rank, like end of story. And it's, if you're a private, you're living in the ghetto. And if you're a major, you've got a nice mansion, right? Like it's very, very segregated like that. For those listening that don't know what military housing's like, the Air Force tends to be a lot
It
nicer,
is.
a lot nicer. But you know, I was blown away that that was an option, and I wish I would have known it when we had moved down here 18 months before, because Patrick is gorgeous, man. It sits right between the two rivers. My sister spent her entire career in the Air Force, pretty much there. You know, like it is gorgeous, and I would have lived there in a heartbeat because I'm not having to take care of the house. You can have whatever. I mean, rent was stupid low compared to what rent on the economy here on the coast is, right? So I love it. What is your? I assume government contracts, obviously the end goal. So if you don't have your service disabled veteran business certification yet, I just hooked up with a guy that's going to help me get mine, and I'd love to connect you with him and help you guys get yours because I know what kind of doors that will open for you guys. Um, where do you see Billets by the end of the year? Are you trying to get more locations, or are you trying to get just more bookings and
So
get the
our
marketing
goal
dialed
is
in?
to continue to recruit hosts, right? Because the more hosts the number one reason that we turn away bookings is not having a host in that area yet, or the hosts that we do have are already booked, right? So again,
So that is your pain point right
hosts.
now is it's not really lack of bookings, it's lack of bookings, it's lack of bookings in the locations that
Right.
are the bookings are
So we
needed.
had a lot in Virginia, right? We get a ton of requests in Virginia. We've had a handful of requests down in Tampa, and then we get onesie twosies all across the US. We had a lot of questions about going global. That's not our focus at the moment. We intend to be global at some point. Um, Right, of course. Like that, of course we would love to have options in Japan and Italy and Germany. Who wouldn't? Especially for like our we'd love to partner with Jessica Cazeta at Libo Risk. I call her out because I've talked to her about this. But and I still think I butcher the name every time, but it's LIBO Risk. She's on Facebook and she has a free travel group. She left the Marine Corps. I think she was an MP, and decided, I think she lived in her van for a while, but she started a travel group and it's massive. And in order to be a host with them, you can't charge anything. And so we'd like to be her host platform at some point. Where you, like, if you decide to open up your home and host a risk member, you get a badge that says you're a Libo Risk partner, and you give up a free night once a month to riskers who come through, right? So we're looking to do partnerships like that where more of our veteran travelers get to go out and explore and do it really simply using our website. To your point about your PM leaving you hanging, we intend for it to be a digital co-host. So it makes it super simple for our active duty members because, again, we want to lower that threshold to entry, that barrier to entry, because nobody can do it like a service member can, and you guys still have to focus on the mission. So how do we give you the opportunity to have financial freedom, build your portfolio, and make sure that you can still focus on what you have to do day to day, and it's not this added burden? um, and again, okay, you're not ready to sell. What do I do? I can't charge rent because, like, just regular rent, because I'm out of pocket $250 every month. Like that, nobody's living like that right now. Nobody can do that. And so the opportunity to do a short-term rental does present the opportunity to charge more per night. And the other value that it adds is if you go ahead and, let's say you buy a fix and flip right outside Montgomery. Right now they're having a really hard time recruiting instructors to Maxwell Air Force Base because Montgomery is not known for its wonderful housing or safety right around the base. But they just It's not, unfortunately. But they just put in a multi-million-dollar water park right outside the base, and the nearest house to it or hotel to it is like 20 minutes away. I'm like, how is that conducive? I would love for like you and I and a couple other veterans to go buy 3 neighborhoods right outside Montgomery, flip them, turn them into long, mid, and short term rentals that also have a couple of businesses in the area that directly serve the veteran population. Because guess what? There's not a ton of restaurants there. If you want to get lunch, you're either doing it on base or you're driving 20 minutes to lunch. Their hours there are really interesting. There's not like a great cleaners right there, or somewhere where you can do stripes, somewhere where you can do all those things that we want to do for like field day or morale day. I'm like, okay, how do we put that right outside the base so that the veterans are making money off of it, our service members are making money off of it and building independent wealth for themselves, but they're reinvesting in the communities where they live, work, and play. And I think this is a great way to do it, because you're not just putting more long-term rentals right outside the base. You're reinvesting and putting it's a short-term rental, right? You're going to want certain activities and certain businesses there, and you can have the cleaner, the handyman, the plumber, the electrician, all those things that baby boomers are selling their businesses because they're wanting to retire, and those trades are going away. So like, I really see it as a whole community rebuild.
I love your vision for it. I'm so excited to see where this goes. Like the way you talk about it, I can tell obviously the only place you're going is success, right? Like you're not going to stop, and it's clear how much this means to you, but also very clear how well thought out it is, and just your ability, like I said earlier, to identify all these other problems and then spawn ideas off of it, and understand that now may not be the right time, but I'm going to put it in my back pocket. And when the right time comes, I have this to use. And so I think that's great. So let's wrap this up. What advice do you have for any veteran who is on the fence about entrepreneurship, who may think I'm full of shit and that entrepreneurship is the path back to purpose? What would you say to those naysayers or those people who don't
um
believe?
do the self work and then just jump in, no matter what it is. Like, whether it's the self work, whether it's the new relationship, whether it's the business, like jump in like you haven't been hurt. You have to. And in the meantime, be evaluating your part in it every step of the way. You If your business is unsuccessful, it is probably you. If your relationship is unsuccessful on some level, it is you. Of course it takes two. But what is your part in it, and how much control do you have over it? Because if you've done everything that you can to make sure that you're the right person, the right CEO, the right marketer, the right girlfriend, boyfriend, and it's still not working out, then your next decision is, how do I pivot? Is it to leave the relationship or to leave the business? Am I going to continue to invest time, energy, money into this particular endeavor, whatever it is? And yeah, it's really doing the self evaluation and figuring out, like, if Billets doesn't succeed, it's 100% because of me. It's going to be because I didn't overcome the anxiety, the networking, I wasn't willing to pivot where I needed to. If my relationship with my husband doesn't succeed, it's because I wasn't willing to learn from my mistakes in my first marriage, which, you know, again, as much as he was manipulative, I was in that relationship. I should have left earlier, like at a minimum. I should have had the backbone to leave earlier at a minimum. I should have recognized the manipulation earlier. Same thing with the person who took my money and ran, right? Like, I should have recognized the manipulation earlier. So,
I think though there's something to that, because doing the work involves facing those things, taking ownership for your part in those things, but not letting those things define or control or direct your life anymore, right? Like it's easy, and I say this with the utmost respect, for you to say, I should have left earlier. I should have, but also understanding that those experiences, they were they were in a part of your journey
absolutely.
for a reason, right? Like, and when you start doing the work on yourself, you find out what that reason was, and it starts to make a whole lot more sense that you start to believe what you're capable of. Oh, I've already been through XYZ. ABC in front of me is not that daunting, right? And then in it, when you're frustrated because somebody ran off with your website money and that really fucking sucks, you don't tend to spiral out of control or fall down the rabbit hole again and get stuck on it. You just see it for what it was. Okay, there's a lesson here. I learned that lesson. I won't make that mistake again. How do I implement this feedback so that I know that it won't happen again, kind of thing, right? And so, like, to your point, if your relationship with your husband fails or Billets fails, it's because you weren't looking for or able to receive the important feedback necessary to move
So
it
like
forward. Correct.
the thing with the money, right? Had I never been in a position where I wasn't sure I was gonna be able to pay rent, right? And had to ask somebody for help. Had I not learned, let me slow down. Had I never been in a position where I had lost all my money and couldn't pay rent, right? And been worried about how I was going to feed my kids, I wouldn't have been as fearless in leaping into building Billets. Because now I know what it's like to be like, well, I'm about to lose my house. I'm eating my one McDonald's meal a day to make sure that I'm fed. Like, I know what that feels like. I know what it's like to be at risk of having your car repoed and whatever else, right? And watch your credit go in the dumps and have somebody else still on your credit cards trying to like get them off. How do I get them off so this stops, right? Yeah, yeah. And it was spiraling quickly. And so that felt terrible. But I figured out like that actually is not the end of the world. Being jobless, being not able to pay the rent, all those things, as much as they suck, they don't define who you are. And so I wasn't near as afraid to leap into this and go, well, if we lose all the money doing it, we lose all the money doing it and we'll do it again. It wasn't the smartest way to do it, but I have to try. And then the work that I've done with my husband for the relationship, he said, so how are you going to learn and not lose our money again on the website? Right. And I didn't want to look at it. I didn't want to face it. I was like, that did not just happen again, right? Where I was taken advantage of. And he's like, but if you don't look at it, how are we going to at least try to avoid it again? And so I had to go back and there were, I record a lot of phone calls just for business purposes, right? And because for notes and to be able to send back and forth, like these were your taskers out of this meeting and these were my taskers out of this meeting. And so I had to go back and watch the recordings and like, oh, I maybe didn't need to tell him that. And so he was able to utilize that to his benefit and make it seem like he cared and make it seem like he was genuinely interested, because I got so excited and just told him everything we're going to do and all this stuff. And it,
Yeah, you played too many cards, but that's only a lesson you can learn by playing too many cards, right? Like I've done it. I just did it recently. I tried to hire, a video editor, and I was like, I'm not ready for this. And I had to go back to him and hang my head and be like, look, man, I told you I'd be honest and transparent with you. I have to let you go right now because I don't have the systems in place. And this is just wasting my time, your time, and my money. Right. Like, and I wouldn't have learned that lesson by just jumping in head first, So I love that advice. That's probably the most solid advice I think that anybody can get, is to just recognize that you got to do a lot of work on yourself before you can do any kind of work.
Yeah. And you can't be afraid to do it. And it sucks and it's embarrassing and it's painful and it's just generally uncomfortable. But man,
and getting comfortable with that feeling, when you start the work on yourself, it's really uncomfortable, but you recognize that same feeling when you jump into business, not knowing, because you don't know. You have no idea at all, ever. I really, I have a general idea of where this is going, but, could I give you each step that I'm going to have to? No, I can't. I can't give you the roadmap because I don't know. I just don't know. And that's an uncomfortable feeling, but I recognize it because I've explored it by doing that work on myself, and I know how to not let it control me.
And so like figuring out where Billets is going, I had a very vague idea, much like what you're talking about, and the potential for where it could go. And, potential is only as good as your ability to go make it actually happen, right? You see the same thing in humans when they have all this potential, and all this talent, but they don't ever do the work. So that's great that this person was brilliant and could play baseball like nobody else, but you could never get him to go practice. So the person who outworked him outworked him. He outdid him and ended up doing better. So am I doing the work on myself every day? And again, it's not that you don't look at it or that you then let it define you. Because I heard the advice the other day, just don't think about it. Well, it's not that you don't think about it. It's that you identify, why did I have that reaction? Is it the right reaction, or the reaction I want to have, right? Did it have the outcome that I wanted? And so I try to be extremely, probably to a fault, honest in my interactions, in my work. Part of the reason we chose Billets is because I felt like it is helping somebody, right? I'm not making money off of hurting people anymore. I'm not making money off of taking advantage of people. It's not a scam, right? People have to travel. I have an opportunity to make their travel better. I have an opportunity by building this to go talk to people about what my experience was and how I overcame it. I have an opportunity to talk about my lessons learned, which is one of my favorite things to do, is tell people like how we can make this better. And it gives me so much, like you said, so much opportunity to talk to people and go, like your first guest, I was like writing things down. Like I had to pull over. I was like, wait, I need to call this guy.
That's awesome. That's so awesome to hear.
I actually connected with him on LinkedIn.
Dude,
and
Rich
have to
is a
reach out
great
to him
guy.
and be like, hey, we need to talk, because I think you have some information and I think I have some information that could be mutually beneficial. So,
yeah, Rich is a
well,
great
I
guy. I'll make the
appreciate
connection
that.
for
But
you for
yeah,
sure.
so
Yeah, because
yeah,
that's what this is all about, right? Like if we don't take that risk and just kind of start something, we don't have conversation like this. And this is, I promise, for those that are watching, listening, wherever you're getting your info, she just said she listened to the first episode, had to pull over and take notes. Like that's incredibly valuable feedback for me. So I really appreciate that. But it also speaks to, I didn't know what this was going to be. I just was like, hey, Rich, like, dude, you went to Peru with me. I'm trying to do this thing. Will you be my first guest? And he was like, absolutely, dude, let's do it. And so from that, we get off of it. I launched the episode and he calls me. He's like, dude, this is awesome. It's like, you're a pro at this. And I was like, yeah, I'm not a pro. Like I just started. You were the first. And it's I don't know. I guess because, on my healing journey, seeing what I've become capable of, knowing the tools and the process to get through all of that, like I want the same thing for everybody else. And that's why I'm here, right? Like to just improve as many people's lives and their situation in life as I can. And I really hope that the show is doing that for people just through conversation. That's all I
think it's
care
exactly
about.
what's missing in society today. We don't have enough face-to-face conversations, and you're not going to convince me to go sit down and talk to a bunch of people right now, for numerous reasons. I'm still afraid of people sometimes, right? Like I just am. It's something I have to work on. I don't know how I'm going to fix it, but I make myself go talk to people. So if I'm,
But the thing is you're aware of it, and you're aware that you're aware of it, and you know you need to work on it. And that's okay also, right? Because some things take longer to move past than others. And there's nothing wrong with that.
yeah, but right. So if we meet and I'm awkward as all get out, I probably peopled as much as I could people, and I'm still trying desperately to just people some more. There were a couple of people that were like, "You're a little at the symposium. You're a little off." I'm like, yes, I am. Bear with me. We'll work through it together. So we'll be awkward together.
Well, tell everybody how they can find you, get in touch with you. So your episode, I'll tell you this now, July 10th, tentatively is when it's going to launch. And I want to put together a whole thing. So we'll get together as soon as we're done recording, but I want to do something to help, Billets out. So just tell everybody how they can find you if they're interested in becoming a host. Where do they need to contact you at? I'll link all of that when I put it up. All your social stuff. Really do want to give you access to the network and help you out as much as I
if
possibly
you
can.
want to book or become a host or just see what we've got, you can find us at the Billets, TheBillets.com. We've got a blog. We've got that talks a little bit about like how to be a great host and how to sign up and why we do what we do. What you can do as a host to be better for specifically the military. If you would like to check out Billets Foundation, where we offset the cost to folks that are PCSing. So when they run out of TLE, TLA, but they're still in between homes and they're paying out of pocket now, to make sure that our hosts aren't coming out of pocket to host and our guests aren't coming out of pocket to live, we've created the Billets Foundation. So we are actively taking donations, and our goal is to help 65 families in the first year. So that is a Facebook page, just Billets Foundation. And we're setting up the website now, but we take donations on GiveButter/PCS season. So givebetter.com/PCS season. And then you can find us on Facebook, TDY House, Billets TDY House. It's a good thing there should be all the links, because but we're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or excuse me, X, Alignable. What are the other ones that are out there? LinkedIn. We're on all of them. So yeah, I think we're even on like Discord. Yeah, potentially. Like, yeah, we tried to make sure that we were findable everywhere. So yeah.
Yeah, reduce the friction. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Alex Tessier from Billets and about 9 other companies that she's got going on. I really appreciate you being here. Thank you so much for sharing your story with the audience and with me. I really do appreciate it. I'm super grateful.
Yeah, thank you
and
so much for having me on, and thanks for your time.
Absolutely. Take care, everyone. That's our show, and I'm truly thankful you've joined us at The Strategic Veteran. If our conversation today sparked curiosity, or if you're ready to elevate your game, I'm here to help. Visit thestrategicveteran.com for exclusive show notes and resources, or to book a coaching session directly with me. Take a moment to subscribe to our podcast and share your review. Your support makes all the difference. For more insights and daily strategies, let's connect on LinkedIn and keep the conversation going. Remember, this isn't just a podcast, it's your strategic advantage in action. Until our next rendezvous, stay bold and continue the mission.